It doesn't matter who votes, but who counts those votes.
If you have no vote, you have no civil rights.
Speaker of the Florida House, or about to be.
Right.
He comes into Yang where you're working.
He came in and he wanted a vote fraud system to be built.
He wanted a vote fraud system to be built.
He wanted a program that could flip the votes without anyone seeing it.
The documentary Murders, Spies, and Voting Lies, the Clint Curtis story, is truly one of the scariest movies I've seen in a very long time.
Because of its design, the Diebold touchscreen machine proved vulnerable to a 20-year-old hack, the old bootloader hack.
There's nothing worse than bootloader hack. And honestly, I haven't seen these kind of things to happen in 20 years.
And Clint Curtis, a Florida computer programmer turned whistleblower, finds himself at the center of what could very well be one of the biggest crimes in American history.
Due to the graphic nature of this program, listener discretion is advised.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this edition of V Radio and Liberty Unleashed. I am the host of V Radio, Neil Kiernan.
And I am the host of Liberty Unleashed, Brian. And it's good to be here again today, Neil. I always look forward to Sundays now in our radio show.
I look forward to them too, because I get to use my super sexy voice and tell some super sexy truth.
So who told you had a super sexy voice?
The ladies do all the time in the chat. You didn't notice?
No, I'm sorry. I did not notice.
Bro, don't be jelly, be marmalade. Marmalade tastes better anyway. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, we got a great show for everybody. We're going to do a reaction video today to a documentary that you sent me during the week. This is about election fraud, and in this case, it's about the Diebold systems that were out there back in the early 2000s. Of course, this last election with Trump and Biden, I'm sure you remember, there was a lot of accusations and still is about voter or election fraud. And, you know, the whole Dominion Fox News lawsuit happened in that as part of that, if you remember.
Yep, I remember. That's why it was odd to me, having been friends with Clint Curtis and interviewed him in the past, to listen to them talking about this topic like it was still controversial when, ironically, you will see some very familiar people when we get into the congressional footage that are on the left that were commenting on the issue, because this problem actually came up in the Bush-Gore and Bush-Kerry elections. This isn't even a Republican versus Democrat issue.
Yeah, and I think, you know, throughout history, as long as I can remember, there's always been, you know, whichever party loses, that party accuses the other one of cheating or rigging the elections. But in this case, what I probably knew about that is the introduction of electronic voting. You know, it's always been paper ballots. So with this electronic voting, obviously the accusation is somebody could rig it.
Right. And that's what Clint had to say. And I'm currently talking to Clint again about coming back on the show, because the other thing that was the reason it was necessary to do this, because I've had this documentary on my BitChute for quite some time, was that I got banned for a week from YouTube for discussing not even the issue with Trump, but discussing the issue about there were problems during the Democratic primary, where a group called TDMS Research had found that there were serious discrepancies between the exit polls and the voter counts during the course of, you know, Bernie Sanders' campaign against Joe Biden. And then somehow, mysteriously, at the end, you know, this is after we even get past like the phone app that like awarded Pete Buttigieg Iowa, that he just happened to own, you know, a portion of the company that made the app, right? You know, then afterwards, Pete Buttigieg didn't do anything of relevance. And then Bernie took the lead and the media desperately tried to act like he didn't, you know, and then all of a sudden out of nowhere on Super Tuesday, aside from all the candidates bowing out, was the fact that Joe Biden went from being like number 8 to being number 1, and won states, even including those in which he did not even campaign in. And that's about all I said about it on a 6-hour stream during the Kyle Rittenhouse trial coverage. And I got banned for a week for saying that. But recently, as Tim Poll had revealed, we are now allowed to discuss this topic on YouTube.
It doesn't surprise me that you got banned for it. I mean, the old YouTube was great. You know, that was the whole thing. Independent creators were encouraged to come on and post content. And the new YouTube became, what's the word? Aside from woke, you know, it was all about just politically correct. That's what I was looking for. It became this politically correct, but only for what seemed to be one side, their side, whatever those at YouTube/Google believed in. And, you know, the news, obviously, we've talked about since probably 2008, you know, the powers to be control the content, they control the news, they control what you hear and see. And so everybody was loving this internet, loving YouTube, loving that independent media and journalists could come on and give a different perspective or give you stuff that the normal news media would not report. And this happened, I mean, not just, you know, for voting, but obviously during COVID, you know, you saw the news talking about, you know, hospitals overflowing, and then somebody would go to that same hospital with the camera and show that it wasn't. And of course, they would get banned from YouTube for doing such a thing like that. So this whole censorship thing, again, it surprises me and it doesn't. It's, you know, the powers to be obviously want us censored. They don't want us to know the truth when it comes to that. But when it comes to YouTube, that's what it was there for us, the independents, not for Fox News and CNN, those guys who already have followings and listeners and their groupies and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah, I agree completely. And, you know, I hope to those of you guys who are tuning in that you share this information because it's important that people realize the truth, that the reality is this: there's no way to make a machine safe. And that's one of the things that we're going to get into. But more than just the issue of whether or not the machines are safe, associates of Clint Curtis were literally murdered for trying to uncover what he did when he testified before Congress. And we'll get into that as we go into the documentary.
Yeah, it's interesting. Now, you know, this last election, Biden got what, 81 million votes, and I'm no Trump supporter, and I have to tell you that I had a hard time believing that Joe Biden got 81 million votes
Right.
out there. And of course, you know, Fox News was, I think, one of the only ones. Well, they're the only ones in this lawsuit with Dominion, but they were, you know, obviously their host came on, Tucker Carlson, Lou Dobbs, Sean Hannity, a few others came on, and they had guests like Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell, and they were making these claims of basically a rigged election out there. And so Dominion filed a lawsuit against them, and we'll talk about Dominion a little more throughout this video as we do the reaction, because there's interesting news there. But they filed on March 21st, a year or so ago, a lawsuit against Fox News to sue Fox News for making this claim. And then in March 31st of 2023, the Delaware Superior Court ordered a trial to determine if Fox News had acted with actual malice. Okay. And, you know, so they were all scheduled to go to court. They were scheduled to do their opening arguments, and Fox News, you know, obviously, I'm sure all the Fox News supporters thought this was going to be their day to prove that Biden didn't win. You know, all the Trump supporters were going to be out there and be like, see, the court showed Fox News was right. And before the opening arguments, the judge announced that the parties reached a settlement, and Fox News agreed to pay Dominion $787.5 million, and acknowledged that the court's earlier ruling that Fox spread falsehood about Dominion. They didn't have to apologize; they just had to acknowledge that they did that. So interesting case there. And again, you know, this goes back. I think every election people claim that there's some kind of rigging or voter fraud. We had Dave Williams on from the Colorado GOP. He's the chairman of that a week or so ago. I guess it was last week. And we asked him the question, you know, if he believed elections are rigged or stolen. And in this case, you know, I guess what we first should do, Neil, is clarify the difference between rigging an election and voter fraud.
Right.
And, you know, I guess what we're going to talk about is the election being rigged. Okay.
Sure. And I guess what I would say, as far as like when you say rigged, and I want to be clear that we actually have the same definition, because like it's kind of like, for example, what John Jackson says here. Notice how the Dems have rearranged their primary. So North Carolina goes first this year. Biden lost New Hampshire and Iowa. So they wanted those two pushed down the list because it's a whole momentum issue. Right. And that's an example of the Democratic Party essentially kind of pushing things in the favor of the candidate that they want. And, you know, because the Iowa thing was heavily contested, and then honestly, they just had to kind of cheat to build, you know, to beat Bernie there, you know, and then you move on to the next state, and he was, you know, he was slamming it down on that one too. But I mean, so there's rigging in so much as like the DNC was caught in 2016, influencing the election unduly. And one of the things that I often tell people is that when it comes to the primaries, this is even worse because the Democratic Party was sued in 2016 by Bernie supporters who, obviously wanted their money back when it was clear that, the money that they had donated to the Democratic Party went to a party that had rigged the election against, their candidate or pushed it against their candidate. And that's why Tulsi Gabbard resigned and then endorsed Bernie Sanders. And, there was all kinds of things that happened back then. But during the course of the lawsuit, the Democratic Party's lawyers defended themselves by saying things like, well, actually, we're a private entity. We are not governed by the Constitution. We can, just pick the candidate out of a hat. We can go into, back rooms and smoke a cigar and decide who the candidate is. And this was all very reminiscent of things they were telling Bernie supporters, that it's not actually meant to be in a democratic process. Like that was. So what it comes down to, folks, is that especially during the primaries, it's not even illegal to do this. You could just do this. They could be running this software the whole time, and it's not illegal. Now, during the general, that's a different issue, but then you got to be able to prove it. And that's not easy to do, especially not, unfortunately, because Trump is a polarizing figure. And this is one of the things I said to Clint was that, unfortunately, because of that, it's difficult for us to even discuss this issue with earnest outside of the issue of Donald Trump himself. The issue of election fraud is way bigger than just talking about Donald Trump. He's like just one faction of this. And in this documentary, we will be discussing the anomalies that were, that happened during the Bush and the Kerry elections. And you got to remember, guys, not only was Bush a Republican, which is important to remember, mind you, a neoconservative, nutcase, vile form of the Republican, right? But it was the Republican Party that initiated this. You're going to have to be open-minded to this. And that's something else Clint pointed out. He's like, well, I'm glad that they are coming around to it, but you're going to need to understand it's not just Democrats who do this. It's literally that there's a deep state, so to speak, that wants to have this kind of power. So anyway, go ahead.
It's amazing. And so talking about, the rigged election, what I refer to is exactly that. People inside the party, inside the government, rigging the election in some way, doing something like we're going to discuss here, which is software to help rig the election. Voter fraud is more looked at in the terms of ballots. So an example would be you go and get 10 ballots and vote, fill out 10 of them, mail some in, go to the voting polls, things like that. So that's more of a voter fraud than a rigged election. And what Dave Williams was talking about was ballot stuffing, which is exactly that, sending a household extra ballots, sending one registered voter 10 extra ballots to the household to vote.
Right.
That would be like ballot stuffing there. So there's generally a difference between rigged and voter fraud, rigged election and voter fraud, but more to the case. And, Democrat, Republican, clearly we can both sit there back and say they both cheat. They both want to get their candidates in. That's the obvious thing. It's Team Republican or Team Democrat. And you want to win. But beyond that, I don't know if I want to call it how easy it is to do or how easy it is to get away with it. Because when you watch this documentary, and I guess people are going to think, well, you're taking us back to 2000. That's done and gone. I think several things. Most people didn't watch this documentary. What we're going to see as we go through this is this guy, Brad, who put this together. He's the only one. The mainstream media really didn't want to cover this or touch this. We can have our conspiracy theories why, and we do, but that's one of the things. And the way, and they'll get into this in the documentary, and you'll see, John Kerry even pretty much conceded. He didn't even try to really challenge it that much, which, to me, there's a whole bunch of other conspiracy theories that go beyond what this documentary is going to talk about and suggest.
Well, and it's interesting that you bring up the John Kerry thing because everybody remembers the "Don't Tase Me, Bro" kid, but they don't remember what he was talking about when he got tased. And he was going to John Kerry and said, that there are election machines that were spitting out votes backwards, that were giving votes to the wrong candidates. And John Kerry was nodding, like he acknowledged what the kid was saying. And, then the cops tase him. Now, mind you, John Kerry also told them to leave him alone. Like, that's fine. I'll talk to him. Just leave him alone, to the guy's credit, right? The point is that John Kerry acknowledged that there were anomalies during the course of that election. And then the Al Gore one was so contentious that the Supreme Court had to rule on it. And then they still found after the fact that Al Gore had actually won the election as far as votes. But that was the end of it. And then they just kind of shrugged it under the rug. And then the neoconservatives take us to Iraq, in Afghanistan, and then start, the plans that they had been hatching for a very long time. And the reason that this is still relevant, aside from just the election itself, is we have to remember that, what was the consequences of George Bush winning that election? Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that Al Gore wouldn't have done the same thing, but I do know that the neoconservatives went to Bill Clinton and tried to get him to invade Iraq, and he said no. So it's within a reasonable doubt that it's also possible that Al Gore would not have invaded Iraq. And if that's the case, that's what brings us here, right? Anomalies start happening in elections this time around the time that George Bush, for some reason, mysteriously, along with his administration, started endorsing Joe Biden. What happens on the first day that Joe Biden is in office? I have evidence of this because it was produced by the Kurdish press, was that troops were literally in Syria, over 200 of them, including armored vehicles, securing oil fields the first day Joe Biden was in office. So,
and of course, we have the Ukraine thing and our proxy war over there right now.
Right.
Ukraine. And I think there's something, we're not going to get into it deep on this program. We can probably do it another time. But, the president isn't picked by the popular vote. It's the Electoral College. And so a lot of times the Democrats, they did this, obviously with Bush elections, but, they scream, well, our candidate won the popular vote, so you stole the election. It's the Electoral College. The popular vote has its play in it, but that's not what picks the president. Sure. And so what the arguments was to win the counties and the areas they needed to get the electoral vote to do it. It didn't matter. I mean, in most cases, if it was done just by the popular vote, we'd never have a Republican president again. Los Angeles, New York, Philadelphia, Houston would essentially pick Democrats every time. So without the Electoral College, we would have even a little less balance of power going on there when it comes to the presidency, in terms of Republican versus Democrat. But again, let's make sure that people know and understand that it's not the popular vote that does it. We have the Electoral College for a reason. I'm all for the Electoral College. I think it should be there. And I think we debated this a long time ago on one of our old radio shows. A lot of people, particularly, I hear a lot of Democrats want to get rid of it. And again, to me, that makes sense if you're a Democrat, because the big cities will then decide for the rest of the nation, and the Midwest essentially would have no voice in it in terms of that. So yeah, but this rigging and what we're about to watch is on a whole other level.
A whole other level, as in people were murdered to cover this up. So when we get to that part, be aware, guys, viewer discretion is advised. It's not super graphic, but I think it'll be pretty obvious to you that this person didn't kill themselves. Epstein, kill themselves. So, all right, we ready to get into it?
Yep, let's rock and roll.
Okay, so if for some reason this doesn't look good on mine, I sent it to Brian as well. I believe I fixed all of my problems with playing videos. If for some reason it's not clear, then we will find a way to fix it. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Let's rock and roll.
Mr. Curtis, if you would come forward.
I would ask the court reporter to swear the witness. Mr. Curtis, would you please state your full name for the record?
Name is Clinton Eugene Curtis.
And what is your profession?
I'm a computer programmer.
Mr. Curtis, are there programs that can be used to secretly fix elections?
Yes.
How do you know that to be the case?
Because in October of 2000, I wrote a prototype for President Congressman Tom Feeney at the company I worked for in Oviedo, Florida, that did just that.
It would rig an election?
It would flip the vote 51-49 to whoever you wanted it to go to and whichever race you wanted to win.
To whoever you wanted to win. On November 2nd, 2004, George Bush was not popular. He was in the middle of an unpopular war. I was watching the exit polls, and it looked very clear that John Kerry was going to win.
Reporting for duty.
And then all of a sudden, the numbers that were coming in did not match up with what was coming in from the exit polls, and it didn't make any sense. It just didn't make any sense. Late in the evening, 6 states that exit polls showed were going to Kerry suddenly veered off to Bush. Ohio then became the tipping point of the entire national election. One guy who was reporting on the ground in Ohio from day one was attorney Bob Fitrakis of the Columbus Free Press. Bob Fitrakis and Cliff Arnebeck became the legal team suing for a recount in Ohio, taking on Ohio's Secretary of State J. Kenneth Blackwell, who also happened to be co-chair for the Bush-Cheney campaign in Ohio.
But let me just remind you of a few of the facts. Ken Blackwell called it a model election, but we're trying to figure out was he talking Mussolini's first coup? There were tens of thousands.
All right, what's up, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, I think getting right into that as we go to react to this.
Sure.
You know, several things. They're obviously showing the key state of Ohio and Florida. As I mentioned, the Electoral College in the beginning, you know, there are key states that help decide this. And, you know, they say if you win these set number of states, which do include Ohio and Florida, you have a much better chance of getting the presidency. Interesting enough, as you keep finding out, and as they showed right there with Ohio, the connection to the George Bush administration. And that's going to seem to be somewhat of a common theme throughout this.
And the other thing that he mentioned was what got him motivated to investigate this meaning the filmmaker, was that the exit polls did not match what was coming out as far as the results. And that's exactly what happened during the Democratic primary, according to TDMS research. And if you guys ever want to see that stuff, I reposted that video on Rumble and BitChute, you know, but I go over this topic there as well. And this full documentary is also available on my BitChute. So you ready?
Yep. Go back a few seconds so we can catch back up and not miss
You got it. 1 second. All right. Vote reform meeting, Los Angeles, 2006.
But we're trying to figure out was he talking Mussolini's first coup? There were tens of thousands of acts of irregularity.
In a single precinct in Ohio, a total of 638 ballots were cast on Election Day. Bush received over 4,000 of them.
24.93% of all the voters in Cleveland were purged, a city that went 83% for Kerry. 7,000 voters lost their right to vote in the inner city of Toledo because the Diebold OptiScan machines froze up.
Warren County is the last county in Ohio to come in with their vote totals, and they locked down the place where they're counting the votes, and they won't allow any witnesses in, won't allow any media in, and they say it's because of a Homeland Security threat. And yet the next day we check with Homeland Security, and they say we never spoke to anyone in Ohio. Bob Fitrakis reported a troubling aspect about Ohio's 2004 election night results. The function of the Secretary of State's computer servers to report election results was moved during the night of the election from Ohio to servers in Chattanooga, Tennessee. They were owned by Smart Tech. Fitrakis reports that Smart Tech hosts a number of GOP websites, including the Republican National Committee and even Karl Rove's infamous White House email accounts,
what a
4 years of
coincidence.
which have gone
Right.
completely missing.
The mythical surge in Delaware County. In one precinct, the last 359 voters voted for George Bush. And they said, well, maybe a church bus showed up. Well, not everyone lives at the same address unless you're a follower of David Koresh.
The Green Party and
You know,
the
go ahead,
Libertarian
Paul.
Party turned out
Yeah,
to be
sure.
huge heroes because they stepped up and said, we want to recount in Ohio.
Go ahead.
It's a common theme that's going on here throughout every election. And it's recount theme and things being moved or done in the middle of the night. And that stuff is actually known. Like even the news reports on it. They did it the last election with Trump and them. And it's interesting that we know some of this stuff, nefarious stuff, is happening. That they're not allowing certain recounts, or they're doing stuff a little bit shady. We don't know if it's shady, but they're doing it in the middle of the night, which would indicate shady. You always have this ballot difference, the count of registered voters compared to how many people voted, or how many people didn't vote that were registered and all of a sudden decided not to show up. And this is a common theme. This is not even just the 2000 or 2004 election. This continues down, and we see that every election.
And so I wanted to comment on John Jackson's comment here. Remember that the exit polls do not capture absentee ballots or early voting. Well, of course they don't. But the issue is that the exit polls of who voted that night should match on what is already being reported that night by the media. And that's the reason why, if there's a huge discrepancy at that point, there's going to be an issue. Right. TDMS research still found that there was huge discrepancies well after the fact. Go ahead, Brian.
I was going to say, John, just watch a little bit more. They'll address some of that as well.
For sure. You ready?
Yes.
Let's do it.
Ohio.
You guys, we're presidential candidates. You can say, we want to recount. Well, you only got 7 votes in Ohio.
Oh, and I want to point out what he was explaining when we were talking was that the Green Party turned out to be big heroes because they, alongside the Libertarian Party, filed the lawsuit that brought about all of this attention to the issue.
Ohio, don't care. We want to recount.
Maybe I got 10.
That's right.
That's what I want to know.
John Kerry didn't fight.
Where was he?
Hiding out, being low key. I mean, one of his attorneys told me, well, he wants to remain viable in 2008.
Instead of remaining viable in 2004, when he
Which
actually
he should
might
have
have won if there was an investigation.
Congressman Conyers went to Ohio to make his report on what had gone wrong in the 2004 presidential election. He's one of the most respected men in Congress. He's the Democratic leader of the Judiciary Committee. And they did a great job. What happened in Ohio simply was corruption on a very great scale, involving a Mr. Blackwell, Secretary of State of Ohio. And the report was very well done, very legalistic in the best sense, constitutional. I wrote a preface to it. The New York Times refused to review it. The Washington Post did not review it. The Wall Street Journal, and of the major papers, only the Boston Globe looked at it, and then they didn't do much about it.
If you saw that George W. Bush, in fact, did not win Ohio, and that John Kerry actually won Ohio, how would you feel about that?
I would feel sick.
Does anybody here think that John Kerry should become the president? You're in favor of George Bush being president, even if the other guy got the most votes?
I don't think he did, but yes. If that were the case, yeah.
Wow, that's not very American, sir.
But I have yet to see any proof that anything was counted incorrectly.
I initially started my blog because the corporate mainstream media, frankly, was not doing their job. I was seeing things that needed to be reported and talked about. I talked about them, and people started to take notice, including the mainstream media, Washington Post and so forth, who would link to me and report on what I was reporting, but wouldn't do it themselves, and still are not doing it themselves.
And you noticed,
Will
go ahead,
there be a realistic investigation of the 2004?
Go ahead.
I mean, she said, I still have not seen any evidence that there was any kind of miscount or whatever, however she worded it.
Right.
And it's that reliance on the mainstream media. And people have this, if it was news, then Fox News and CNN would report it then. I've heard that, and I still hear that today. Like somehow, if they don't report it, then it's not real and it's not news. It couldn't be that there's some conspiracy going on here and they're purposely not reporting it. It means it's not true, that there wasn't any fraud or there wasn't any wrongdoing. I find that very obviously sad and dangerous that we think that these news companies are the all-knowing and the all-saying, and either what they say is gold or what they don't say is an indication that nothing happened. That's what I find interesting. And she kind of made that point when she's saying it, like, I saw no evidence. I see no evidence of this. And then, you've got the Secretary of State there in Ohio, who was, buddies with Bush. And I think most people, and I'm probably guilty of this myself, truly don't know the power and the job description of certain levels of government. You know, with the Secretary of State, how much power he seems to be able to wield, what he's able to stop or allow to happen in his state seems to be very interesting to me, that he's got that say, like, oh no, we're not counting these ballots, or we're not doing this recount, and that's it. That's the end all. That either means he has the power, or that the governors and other people of that state didn't step up and override him. And I find that interesting too. And then we'll get on as this goes on about, the chairman of, the Speaker of the House, in Florida, and the power they seem to have as well.
Did you see that he was talking to the chairman of the Libertarian Party at the time?
Yeah, I did. I didn't, for some reason, I just did not remember that guy's name. And
well, there it is. Yeah, but what I was going to say also, and this is something that Clint Curtis pointed out too, that to those of you who are MAGA that are listening to this, it is one thing to be interested in election fraud, but it needs to be something that you need to be just as concerned about, regardless of who won. And as you saw, as he talked to one Republican there, well, even if he didn't get as many votes, I'm glad George Bush is president, right? You can't, what Clint was saying is you can't just be loyal to this issue if your party happens to lose, right? That this needs to be an issue no matter who won. And Clint Curtis, is a Democrat right now, and he still went on. He was asked to speak on this issue by the My Pillow guy, whose name is escaping me. So he went to conservative speaking events to talk about this topic, because he is more concerned about us having real elections than he is about his party winning or losing. But what I'm getting at is, this is not me damning on the Republican Party. You got to understand that at the end of the day, these two groups, how many times have you seen pictures of Bill Clinton playing golf with George Bush? Right? They fight each other publicly, but honestly, it's like I said to Mac Beggs earlier, it's like WWE Raw or WWE SmackDown. It's all still bullshit. Right?
Right. I kind of compare it to, like, I know back in the day, for those who are music fans, particularly hard rock or heavy metal, and everybody wanted to talk about, who's better, like Metallica or Slayer. And I always said that's a fan fight. Those two they get together, they tour together, they hang out and drink together. They don't care who's arguing over, as long as we buy their albums. And it's the same thing. What I'm saying is, it's a club. They're at this elite level of musicians where they're touring on a national level, and fans are the ones down there arguing over who's better. And it's the same thing. We're down here arguing over who's better, this Republican or Democrat. And on that level, yeah, like you said, they fight publicly, but they go out and have drinks together. They hang out and play golf together. It's one big club. And I think it's very dangerous, and I'm sure we'll repeat that on this show and many other shows, to have anybody say, well, I don't care if there was election fraud or voter fraud, as long as my candidate won. We're better off with my candidate than that other candidate. There is actually nothing that shows in history that I can point out right now that shows that we're any less safe or any better off, whether it's Republican or Democrat, in the White House. In fact, when it's Republican-controlled Congress and Democrat in the White House, our economy, the spending actually goes down. But when it's Republican in Congress and Republican in the White House, it actually has the most spending out there of any party. So interesting enough. But at the end of the day, they both sides will be warmongers and go to war. Both sides will spend your tax money any way they want. Both sides are involved in nepotism throughout the whole process. Again, it's a big club, and we're not part of it.
Right. Like, as George Carlin used to say, it's a big club and you ain't in it.
Exactly.
So, all right, let's keep going.
Election. Because at this point, the votes in Ohio have not been counted, not even once.
The same kind of crass effort to stop the black vote that was exposed in Florida, I know for a fact took place in Georgia and probably all across the South.
I'm in Tennessee to attend a national conference on election fraud. A man named Bernie Ellis organized the conference called Gathering to Save Our Democracy.
Clint Curtis is the whistleblower from Florida.
Yeah.
So he's going to show how you can hack into a system.
If you have no vote, you have no civil rights.
I first came in touch with Clint Curtis after I had reported on a group named Justice Through Music that was putting on a reward of $200,000 for evidence of fraud in the 2004 election. Clint was one of the folks apparently who had contacted them with his story, with his information, and he said, in I believe that very first email to them, that he didn't want the reward, but he wanted them to know his story.
In 2000, I was working for Yang Enterprises, which was a company in Oviedo, Florida, and their chief lobbyist, their corporate attorney, and Speaker of the House of Florida was Tom Feeney. And he was there to feed his contracts. So he came in one day, one of my first introductions to him, and he wanted us to build a vote flipping software.
He's the Speaker of the Florida House, or about to be.
Right.
He comes into Yang where you're working.
He came in and he wanted a vote fraud system to be built.
He wanted a vote fraud system to be built?
He wanted a program that could flip the votes without anyone seeing it. He wanted it to be able to be run on a touchscreen machine.
Okay.
In other words, hidden buttons on the screen or something like that. No keyboards, no guy in a black mask sitting across the street in a van poking things in. Just walk up and do something. And he wanted the source code to be written in such a way that the manipulation was hidden even if you saw the source code.
Is that possible?
It's not possible. If it's there and someone takes the time to look, you can't hide it. So I told him right up front that as long as you can see the source code, you can't hide it. Cannot hide it, can't be done.
And what did he say?
Well, Mrs. Yang cut me off and said...
Who's Mrs. Yang?
Mrs. Yang is the head of the company.
All right.
And she cut me off and said, we'll build it for you. Give you something to show.
Did you understand that he was asking you to do something that was illegal?
I was a Republican. I thought Tom Feeney thought the Democrats had something planned.
Okay.
And he was trying to prevent it. So I built it, delivered it the next day to her. I had a little document all written up on, how, in order to make sure that, fraud was found, what elements you would need.
Right.
And she cuts me off and says, you don't understand. In order to get the contract, we need to hide the code. This is for flipping the vote in South Florida.
This is the same Tom Feeney who, as Speaker of the House in 2000, claimed that no matter what, the Supreme Court said he was going to give the electors to George W. Bush.
Yes, that's the guy.
So, yeah.
The same Tom Feeney, as I understand it, who was...
What were you going to say?
I mean, he might be making the point that I'm about to say, but Tom Feeney seemed to be a member of Congress and also was an advisor and attorney for Yang Enterprise. Not a conflict of interest or any nepotism going on there, making sure that they get the contract for the programming that he happens to be the company he gets paid from while he's the Speaker of the House, right?
Right, absolutely. And a mild spoiler, I mean, if we're worried about conflict of interest, just wait till we get to the part about selling secrets to the Chinese government.
Yeah, and this is what apathy really does to a country. I mean, this is damning. It's bad. And this isn't the only case of it happening where politicians are involved with private enterprise to create stuff, to do stuff like this. And it's known facts. We know that he did this. He was part of this. And yet nobody's still really demanding any change in the system, really crying out loud from it. Both parties are still going about as if it's okay. And that's just the way things are.
And you're a crazy person if you think that there could ever be anything wrong with it. That's one of the reasons why the whole thing was frustrating for me, because I wanted to continue bringing this to people's attention because, I mean, hell, you and I were basically activists, began being activists during the Bush administration. So like, this is our era. And we used to talk about this issue. I mean, we didn't talk in so much as about it as with this, but I know Ron Paul got mistreated, and then obviously other candidates got mistreated, and we've been over that since, but it's like Joseph Stalin says, it doesn't matter who casts the votes. It's who counts them. So, but anyway,
and how many times,
go ahead.
Yeah. How many times, well, you said back then we started to become activists. How many times did we speak up about things like this only to be called conspiracy theorists, only to later be vindicated and be like, it wasn't a theory. We were right. It was a conspiracy. It wasn't just a conspiracy theory. And then people just shrugged their shoulder at that. It's like, okay, so what? You were right. Whatever.
So
I kind of get
you're right.
Yeah, it's kind of like, oh, well, even a broken clock is right twice a day. And it's like, well, no, this isn't a broken clock scenario. And, throughout the whole thing, the wars that we're involved in, the spending, the way that they're just eroding away at our civil liberties, it's happening, and it keeps happening at the way we were saying it was happening. So this isn't broken clock right twice a day.
Right. And I think that it's also like, to me, I think that, I mean, the last 3 years, I guess. So if anybody's going to look back on this decade, because you usually look back on a decade, right? We haven't been doing this lately, but you look back at, say, the 40s are known for this, the 50s are known for that, the 60s are known for this. Well, I think that the new 20s are going to be known for, these were the years when everybody said things were a conspiracy and they turned out to be true.
Right.
All right. You ready?
Well, that's the difference between a conspiracy theory and a conspiracy. The theory is exactly that. You're just theorizing. The conspiracy is the truth. It happened.
Right.
You know, it's like everything about Area 51 seems to be a conspiracy, or used to be a conspiracy theory. Now it seems to be an actual conspiracy.
Right. Well, I mean, the military would claim that the place wasn't even there. And I remember Montel Williams. Remember Montel Williams? He was a talk show host. He really like drove out there with cameras and made them admit that there was actually something there.
That's a blast from a past name, huh?
Yeah, no kidding. But I mean, it's necessary to understand the present. You have to understand the past. You ready?
Yes.
Was Jeb Bush's running mate for governor back in '94, when Jeb lost, by the way.
Yes.
So Feeney did him no good.
Did him no good that time.
That time.
There you
You're
go.
right.
And so Feeney was basically feeding his contracts and saying, you know, can we do this? Can we do that? You know.
Okay.
I was kind of the technology supervisor. If we could do it, then I would tell them, and we could run whatever, you know, little test pattern they wanted for us.
Jeb was already governor at that point?
Yes.
2000? Okay.
Jeb was already governor.
When I was contacted by Clint, I said, well, would you be willing to put this into an affidavit, a sworn affidavit? Since a lot of this stuff off the bat is still difficult to prove, especially that nugget of that meeting with Tom Feeney and the vote rigging software is still largely a he said story.
On December 6, 2004, Clint Curtis filed an affidavit with Congress alleging that one of their members, Tom Feeney of Florida, had asked him to create vote rigging software.
He asked you to design a code to rig an election.
Yes.
While he was Speaker of the Florida House.
Yes. When we filed the affidavit in December, the dog turned up shot the very day we filed that. So I don't know if it's a threat or more of just we can do whatever we want whenever we want it kind of a statement.
The day that I broke the story, Clint Curtis's affidavit, I had been awake for 3 days straight. I was so creeped out by this entire thing that I couldn't sleep. The same day that I broke that story, I got a phone call from Clint in D.C. saying that his dog had been shot. And I thought, oh man, he's, you know, Clint's gonna, with this kind of crap happening, he's not gonna want to continue, you know, telling this story. He said to me, no, you're damn right. We're going to keep reporting this story, and we're going to keep, you know, I'm still going to continue talking about what I've learned.
Yang's attorney quickly released a statement claiming that Mr. Curtis's allegations are categorically false and that Clint Curtis is a disgruntled former employee.
I have heard, Clint, that you were a disgruntled employee of Yang, and that's why you've been making these claims.
That was their original excuse until I produced, and I think it's got on your blog, isn't it? This card, which they gave me, which said, you know, come back anytime, the door will always be open.
This is what Yang said to you.
Well, the actual owner, Mrs. Yang, wrote that.
I'm wondering if Mrs. Yang is available. This is Brad Friedman calling. Any idea when she might be available? I'm working on a story on deadline.
$10 says she's not.
Is there a spokesperson for the company that might be able to answer some questions?
Landline phone. Hello. Look at that monitor.
This meeting with Tom Feeney, where he asked you to create what is essentially vote rigging software for electronic voting machines. Tom Feeney is in the room. You're in the room. Mrs. Yang, the CEO, is in the room. Anybody else in the room?
Mike Cohen.
Who is Mike Cohen?
Mike Cohen was the executive secretary for Mrs. Yang. He was basically the note taker.
Mike Cohen, the executive secretary for Mrs. Yang, whom Curtis claimed was at the vote rigging meeting, told.
What's up?
So to to put this piece of the puzzle together for everybody, he's the Speaker of the House. He also is an attorney for Yang Enterprises, and he goes to the programmer at Yang Enterprises as a Republican Speaker of the House and says, write me some vote rigging software.
Right.
I mean, that's bold. That's as ballsy as you get.
Right.
If you really want to talk about it, because, I mean, you're almost out in the open at that point. And obviously it's your word against this guy's, and Yang Enterprise is going to put out their press release and their statement saying, well, he was a disgruntled employee and he was a bad employee. And, he's just saying this stuff. So I guess you got that going for you, his word against mine, but man, that is still ballsy.
Right. And in addition to that, the fact that, they want to cover it up and that the company was okay with it, that they knew what they were getting into. But as we learn more about this company, it'll start to become clear why maybe he felt these were the right people to ask for the job.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and they probably will mention it. If not, then I think what I discovered was that Clint was saying that this is really not that difficult software to write. But it was still like an $8 million contract.
Right.
So you want to talk about overinflating, overspending, not giving a crap about the taxpayers' money and what happens to it. You were basically saying, I don't give anything about the taxpayer and the people in my state, district, country. I don't care how much they pay in taxes or what happens to the money. I'm rigging this election. And not only am I rigging this election, but I'm making sure people get paid a lot of money, which includes me sitting on the company that, I'm asking to write the software. So, gee, I wonder why he's so wealthy.
Right. Imagine that.
Oh. Yeah, go ahead.
So, let's go.
Told a reporter from Wired that the meeting never took place.
And I called him and I said, hi, this is Brad Friedman. Brad, yes, Mike Cohen, I wanted to ask you a couple. Brad, I don't want to be impolite. I'm going to hang up the phone, but I don't want to. But Mike, I'm wondering, can you, Brad! And he just would not let me get out a word. And then he hung up. And I guess he doesn't want to speak to me.
If they really tried to put out a program to do vote fraud,
right?
The minute they checked the source code, they'd see it.
It sounds like you presumed that these counties, these states, and so forth would examine the source code before it was actually used in an election, correct?
Well, yeah.
But they do not, correct?
That's what I've heard.
What did you think when you heard that?
That I should tell people what's going on. What he wanted was a program that would flip.
Go ahead.
I mean, it doesn't even matter. He's saying that if they had it in the source code or not, nobody's going to look at it. They're going to say, okay, here's our voting machines. And there's going to be no independent auditor looking at the source code. Like, okay, company wrote us software. Here we go. No, trust me, it works. We like this company. We gave them the contract, so no need to audit it.
Right, exactly.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Oops.
The vote. And this is what I produced, basically. It looks like that.
You've compiled essentially a prototype program to
Yes.
show how somebody could, in fact, if they wanted to, use the touchscreen software to flip the vote.
Correct.
Is this the actual program that you built for them?
No.
So you don't
massive
have the
contract.
actual software that
no,
you
I
wrote
just
for them?
rewrote a duplicate of it because it's real simple. It's like 100 lines of code. This is a little garbage program that I wrote for Feeney. You don't see the actual vote count. So you walk up. Who do we want to vote for here? Kerry is winning a little bit, okay? You come in, you vote for Bush, you vote for Bush, you vote for Bush. Always adds by one. Vote for Kerry, vote for Kerry. So the people that are going to be validating this machine can stand there all day long and vote for somebody and it will be right every time. Pretty simple, okay? But the guy could walk up here and if he hits the right buttons, he can flip the vote that easy. So the whole vote total has changed. You could have 20 people standing behind his back while he's poking at a screen, and you never saw it.
What's the percentage that you worked out to?
51-49.
51-49.
Because it's under the recall. Close enough, you don't have a recall. When I actually wrote it, it wasn't Bush Kerry, it was cat and dog, I think, or something like that.
I think the voting should still be done on paper because it's way too easy to manipulate computers.
Jesse Jackson and I were on a speakerphone with Mr. Kerry, and we told him. Mr. Kerry didn't really respond to what we said about Ohio, but he did point out that the OptiScans in wherever they used them in New Mexico, he lost regardless of the Democratic and Republican registration. He said, it sure seems like I lost everywhere they used those machines.
Why didn't you leave the building with a copy of the source code to prove what had gone on?
Because it's a secured site. You don't do that. We have government contracts and nothing is supposed to leave the building.
It is more difficult to get into the Yang offices than it is to get into a government office.
Really?
Yes. I was an employee of the Department of Transportation.
Florida Department of
The
Transportation.
Florida Department of Transportation. The department entered into a contract with Yang, I believe, in January of '99. I had known Mrs. Yang since approximately '94, '95.
Did she ever tell you how she came to hire Tom Feeney?
She indicated to me that now that he was in politics, that they had hired Mr. Feeney as her general counsel.
Did that strike you as odd that a company doing business with the state would hire the incoming Speaker of the House?
It struck me as odd that an individual like this, in addition to being general counsel for a vendor, would also be the registered paid lobbyist for a vendor. And Mr. Feeney was both for Yang Enterprises. His political campaign offices were in the same building where...
What were you saying?
Paid lobbyist for them, and he was their counsel, their legal counsel.
Right.
So he was paid to be their legal counsel and paid to be a lobbyist while he was becoming Speaker of the House.
And was asking for election rigging software, and you got to imagine that this company probably got something out of it too.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Let's not forget that part, that he was asking for election rigging software.
Well, right. Corporations like, have a vested interest in seeing to it that certain people hold office. That's obvious. So, anyway, was that all?
Yeah. Just wanted to point that out.
You got it.
She had her offices in the building in which she owned. Something was slowly going wrong. The invoices from Yang began to escalate every time I would reject an invoice and say, no, this is not what we agreed to. Here was your authorization. That's all you can bill. We'll have to discuss this with our general counsel, Mr. Tom Feeney. He's the Speaker of the House. So they began using his name, trying to intimidate me.
Did you have enough of a concern about it to go to anybody and say, hey, this doesn't seem right?
Since he was Speaker of the House and a member of the House, I'll call the House Ethics Committee and said that, I was having a problem and there may well be political influence, and how did they handle these things? And they told me that Mr. Feeney was the person who would review it and either accept it for review or throw it out as being not worthwhile.
Wait a minute.
And I said, I'm complaining about Mr. Feeney. And they said, we don't have any way to bypass him. The way our committee is set up, Mr. Feeney is the one who will evaluate your complaint. For one of our elected politicians to use the power of his office for self, that's not supposed to happen.
Prior to getting introduced to Feeney,
right,
they just seemed odd. Things were odd. They had people sneaking up the back stairs, and they were...
I have to pause it for a moment just to mention, think about what she just said, folks. The person that she would have had to report Feeney to was Feeney. Right.
That's what I was saying earlier, the amount of power that they have. And, we talked about this on the last show as well, people paying attention, too much attention to who's the president and not enough to their state level and local level. And that's, they seem to miss what's happening there, what happened in Ohio with that Secretary of State being buddy up to George Bush. Feeney being the one she has to complain to about Feeney. Not much you can do at that point, can you?
Right. No kidding. All right. So let's get back to it.
To use the power of his office for self, that's not supposed to happen.
Prior to getting introduced to Feeney,
right,
they just seemed odd. Things were odd. They had people sneaking up the back stairs, and They were downloading information from NASA that didn't seem like they should be doing that. You know, things like this.
They had a NASA contract, correct?
Yes.
And they have to have sort of top secret clearance to have this
I would
contract?
assume they must have some clearance because, you know.
Did Feeney help them get that contract?
Don't know, but he has connections to NASA. His wife works there.
So you don't know if Feeney was instrumental in helping them get that particular contract. Okay, you said that they were downloading stuff from NASA software?
Yang Enterprises was bringing gigabytes of databases from NASA, and then they were handing it over to Henry Nee.
Who is Henry Nee?
Henry Nee was a little skinny Chinese guy that worked there, and he wasn't legal.
He was an illegal alien?
Mm-hmm.
Even while I was looking into the story, we then discovered the matter of Henry Nee.
They finally arrested him for sending missile chips to China.
Henry Nee was in fact arrested after a 4-year sting last year on 3 counts of attempting to send Hellfire anti-tank missile chips to China.
And he admitted to doing it 20 times.
And he pled guilty to one of the charges and admitted it was a slow year, so they only did this 10 to 20 times. And when he was sentenced in October of 2004, he was sentenced to 3 years probation and a $100 fine.
Pretty weak, huh? He seems to think he's pretty much promised a green card as soon as he's done with his probation.
To this day, Mrs. Yang, I understand, says that Henry Nee never worked at Yang Enterprises, Inc.
It's one of the reasons you can prove that he was working on the project was the fact that they actually billed for him.
They're sending timesheets to you saying, here's who worked on what and how many hours they worked and so forth.
Correct.
One of them was Clint Curtis.
One of them was Clint Curtis.
One of them was Henry Nee.
One of them was Henry Nee.
She was regularly shipping information off to her brother in China.
She, Mrs. Yang,
Mrs.
the
Yang.
CEO. Okay.
Right.
Who was her brother in China?
Her brother, according to her, she got drunk one time and she was happy, and she was telling me about her brother had been thrown out of the country for spying. Of course, she said he didn't do it, but he'd been tossed for spying, and then she's doing all this correspondence. She said it was video games, and I asked her, should you really be shipping all this stuff to your brother since we have NASA contracts and the government thinks he's a spy? If you got every environmental group, every group you have, just say, we're not going to.
So real quick, I want to comment on this because of the implications. So the same company that takes this contract to rig our elections is also sending missile secrets to China and has NASA contracts.
But it's video games.
Oh, right. Consider the implications of that, especially when you consider what's going on in the world right now, right? But in addition to that, some of you may remember this. There was kind of a leaked, like the equivalent of a Chinese TED Talk, wherein somebody had gotten their hands on it. And it was circulated on the internet. I'll try to find it. But basically what it amounted to was that a Chinese person was saying the quiet part out loud about all the influence that they have in the White House. And they were telling, like, you know, a group of Chinese people that were assembled there. And one of the things they said was that, you know, we had all these problems and, you know, basically referring to their interactions with Trump. And then they said, but then Joe Biden got elected and everything changed, right? All of a sudden, they were so much better off. So just something to consider.
You know, I've read a couple books and some documentaries about spies and espionage. And the one thing that's common when we get somebody to spy for us, so if we want somebody to spy for us in Russia, somebody to spy for us in China or Cuba, generally it's easy because what they want at the end is freedom. They want to get out of that country and they want asylum and protected in America. Americans can be bought. That's our thing. It's real easy to just give us a lot of money and we'll sell the secrets, you know, that way. So we're not trying to get where it's not like, oh, well, you know, I really want to go to China bad, so I'll sell you these secrets if you make sure you give me asylum in China. It's more or less China just pays them, or Russia just pays them a lot of money, usually in cash, obviously, probably these days also in Bitcoin. But, you know, cash is definitely king for Americans to want to spy and send secrets over to these other countries. In a lot of cases, and this is interesting and kind of off topic, but the information that these countries are getting, a lot of times are, I wouldn't say inconsequential, but not as bad as the news plays it out when the news is saying, oh, they're selling secrets to our country and making our national security unsafe. It's usually not that bad in these cases, or at least in the books and the documentaries I've seen. But obviously people are still mad because they're selling American secrets and there's that patriotism involved. But again, interesting enough, we're bought and paid for with cash to spy on our country. The other countries are bought and paid for by freedom, by the promise of freedom.
Right. And just to consider people that, how all these hands are being shaken essentially is that people who might have at stake in how our elections, go, some of those people are not going to be in this country, obviously. So anyway, you ready to continue?
Yes.
All right.
Going to do anything else, we're going to make the vote system and we're going to fix it. And you could fix it in 2 months, but you've got to abandon everything else for those months and not save the whales and not do anything else, but fix that problem, because if you don't fix that problem, nothing else you want to do will matter.
Thank you. I am pleased to follow that liar, Clint Curtis. In case anybody missed it this morning, Clint Curtis passed a lie detector test, and it ran in this morning's St. Petersburg Times.
Did you have any concerns about taking the polygraph test?
No. I've been trying to for quite a while, but the opportunity came along for someone who is supposedly, top of the line.
Right.
Big career with Florida Department of Law Enforcement, so it's a good time to do it.
What'd they ask you? Do you remember?
They basically were trying to validate the affidavit that I gave to Congress.
The lie detector test that Clint Curtis took was administered by Tim Robinson, who used to be the chief polygraph examiner for the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. Clint Curtis was found to be truthful in all of his responses. Congressman Tom Feeney has yet to take his polygraph exam.
You have a serious problem because you want your candidate to win, and you don't want the election to be rigged. But as it stands right now, we don't have a clue as to whether or not our elections will be rigged.
Hari Hursty was invited by election supervisor Ion Sancho to test the Diebold AccuVote optical scan voting machine in Leon County, Florida.
Clint Curtis said that the program was never used. As far as he knows, it was a proof of concept. Is there anything about his concept then?
From the touchscreen systems, all touchscreen systems out there, it's impossible for me to say if actually you can do it with all the machines. Definitely you can do it with the Diebold, both Diebold platforms.
And the presumption here being that nobody gets to look at the source code.
Well, in Diebold, I would say I would build it so that you cannot find it from source code even if somebody looks it. And that's, I wouldn't go to that area.
Can it be built? Well, I don't know if he's a good enough programmer to do it. Could it be done that you can actually hide it in the source code so that it cannot be done?
Yeah.
Found?
Yeah.
Black box voting facilitated a number of hacking demonstrations. Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney was able to witness the vulnerability of a Diebold central tabulator firsthand.
With 3 clicks of a mouse and some instructions from those who know how to do this, I was able to hack into the Microsoft program that tabulates the votes, change the election vote, and then exit from the program. Now, I saw it, I did it, and so then that means that I kind of know that it can be done.
Clint called me and told me that he had resigned from Yang.
Why were you resigning in the first place?
Because they're crooked. And if they're ethically challenged, I don't want to be there.
I gave him a listing of firms that we did business with and told him if he were made available through an existing contract, I would then be able to contract with him.
So you went to the Florida Department of Transportation after you left Yang Enterprises,
Yes.
correct? Yang had like an $8 million contract, right, with FDOT?
They found out I was working there, and they just went ballistic. They started calling all over the place, and I needed to call them as soon as possible.
Who called you?
Mike Cohen.
So Yang is now calling you after you went to work at FDOT?
Right. They were all in the room talking. I could hear them mumbling in the background, and Mike was basically the voice coming out of this.
Why are they calling you?
They want to offer me big money to come back at first, you know. And then when it got to the point of, well, Feeney will find you a different job and we'll give you this $1 million anyway, it's like, why?
They offered you $1 million.
They offered me $1 million just to leave Tallahassee.
And why didn't you take that?
Because that's not right.
Why isn't it right? Is there anything illegal about?
Well, if you're
they're offering you a job, it's $1 million. How much were you making when you worked at Yang before?
60,000.
60,000.
Yeah.
And now they're offering you $1 million.
Now offering me $1 million. That's quite a price increase if there's not something illegal going on.
Are they still looking for someone?
Go ahead.
There's like a quote, and I don't know it exactly. I didn't look it up, but something about all it takes for tyranny to take hold is for good people to do nothing. Here, this guy is being a good person and doing something. He's turning down essentially our bribes. He's whistleblowing and saying, hey, this isn't right. And yet tyranny is still taking hold.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, well, the system isn't set up to help people that are like that. I mean, we saw Congressman Ron Paul, Dennis Kucinich, Mike Gravel. You know, whether you agree with their policies or not, I think you would at least agree that all three of the men I just mentioned had integrity and actually give a crap, right?
Right.
You know, and the same thing about RFK Jr. You know, I mean, I don't agree with everything he says either, but I think he's genuine, right? You know, the law is not the law. I mean, it's kind of a Freudian slip. The government system is not really meant for people at this point who have integrity. The kinds of people that were our founding fathers, you know, would look at this right now and be aghast because they would fight duels over stuff like this, you know.
Right. And I think I'm commenting more from the American citizen's point of view.
Right.
There's just not a big uprising. And I mean, I'm not calling for riots or anything like that, but if you look at other countries, I mean, heck, they don't even, they riot over not getting a 35-hour work week. And, you know, we've got this amount of fraud and corruption and nepotism going on rampant across our political system. And we sit back and shrug our shoulders at it. And when the good guy comes out and speaks up, he's generally vilified and people don't believe him. They come out with anything they can say to discredit him. And I'm not just talking about the people who want to discredit him. People will sit back and look at him and say, well, you know, why is he the only one? If there was more, you'd expect more people to come out and say it. Why just him? Something's going on there. Why didn't he take the $1 million? Is he crazy? You know, it's just that kind of thing where even us as citizens will turn our head toward what we're being told is out there.
Right. No, I agree. I mean, and the viral clip of him testifying before Congress has been available for years. Even when you and I were watching it during the Ron Paul campaign, it wasn't news. It had happened a while ago. Right. You know, like, and people, like, everybody knows about it. And the funny thing is I think it was Maxine Waters. There's like a prominent current, like, well-spoken Democrat who was present at that time, like at that hearing, and asked him questions. And then later on, if you interviewed her and asked about election fraud, she never would have ever brought this up, you know, because again, the attitude is still, well, as long as we won, right?
Right.
You know,
and let's remember that nothing's changing here except for the name. The companies are being bought out. Diebold didn't go away. It got bought out. And then the lawsuit with Dominion and Fox News, Dominion is Diebold. They bought it out. They bought out Premiere and all the intellectual property that went with it. They bought everything out from Premiere, the building, their intellectual property, everything. So this stuff didn't go away just because you don't hear about Diebold anymore. It's the same thing. It's just now Dominion.
right. Exactly. And that's, and you know, the funny thing is I just had kind of an ancient North Virginia Patriots podcast memory. But I remember calling into the show before I was part of it, and I brought up that it was found that Mitt Romney owned part of the Diebold Corporation.
Gee, another Republican involved in it, huh?
Well, right. Imagine that, right?
Although
You know?
I'm not sure if he's a real Republican, but he at least had the R next to his name. But go ahead.
You know, he's my least favorite Republican of all time. You know, so there's probably worse, but still, obviously you got George Bush, but you know, or
McCain.
Dick Cheney or any of them. I almost can't even call them Republicans anymore, especially now that I've watched what Glenn Greenwald has to say. It's very clear that the neoconservative thing is separate to party because now all the neocons are in the Democratic Party. We can get into that another time. But so there's a very contentious poll going on at in the V radio chat between Do you feel that George Bush actually won the elections against Gore and Kerry? It was at neck and neck 50-50 for quite a while. There was 11 votes out of 31 people watching. Please consider to participate in the poll. It's a good way to, keep yourself occupied as we get through this long video.
So wait,
Go
you're
ahead.
telling me, I didn't mean to interrupt, but you're telling me that we have close to 50% of the people who believe that the election was legitimate even while they watched this video?
It looks like it, although it just went up again because now it's back to 50-50. I've never had a poll that bounced like this. It makes me wonder if there's election rigging software being
I was going to say, are they messing with us?
All
How many
right.
times did one person get the vote?
Right. Let's continue.
Because I could use some.
Oh,
yeah.
could you use some
Yeah,
money?
I mean, if it's $1 million,
You don't have to show up for the job either.
I'll
You have
leave
to come in.
Tallahassee.
Well,
It's
yeah.
not a problem. He told you and others
In the office?
in the
Oh, yeah.
office about this phone call he received from Yang where they offered him.
It was an ungodly amount of money.
What did he tell you the offer was for?
To leave DOT and keep his mouth shut.
So I start talking to Mike
Cohen,
personally, Mike Cohen,
the executive
on the phone
secretary.
at night, and trying to find out what's going on, And basically he told me what was going on, They had illegal aliens working there, Henry was a spy. They were ripping off FDOT, the whole routine. And it turned from, bribes to, we're going to have Ralph come kill you kind of stuff.
Whoa, what do you mean we're going to have Ralph come kill you?
Ralph's a sniper. Ralph was a sniper.
Now, this
in
is Ralph
Vietnam.
Thompson, the guy you said was the VP at one time?
The VP, right.
Mike Cohen says to you that Ralph is going to come kill you?
Well, actually he says Ralph used to be a sniper. You'd never even see it coming. But, Ralph is now 60. You might have been a great sniper when you're 20.
Okay.
But, crawling through the woods when you're 60 is not quite the same.
Don't taunt Ralph.
Don't taunt Ralph?
No, this is being taped.
Yeah.
You got enough problems. Certainly you go to the police. Somebody has just told
So
you.
then I go through the books. I have to have some sort of evidence because otherwise...
What books do you go through? What are you talking about?
Well, since I worked in the same department where the billing had come in, I started looking through the contract, and they had been overbilling for me for years. And they were billing like 40 hours a week for forever.
Were you working 40 hours a week on the Yang contract?
Not at all, not even close. Working on the NASA contracts and the ExxonMobil contracts.
But you were working 40-hour weeks, essentially?
Mm-hmm.
And all of that time was being billed to Yang, even though you were not doing all your
Right.
work for FDOT?
They even billed for a couple of days after I had left them and was working at FDOT. So I told Mavis Georgalis, and she said, well, we need to go to the Attorney General's office.
You and Mavis Georgalis together?
Yes. She went up with me and told the story, and I told my part of it.
And the Inspector General was whom?
Ray Lemmy.
What complaints were made with Raymond Lemmy?
Improper invoicing on the part of Yang Enterprises. Improper political influence.
Because of
coming
Tom.
down from Tom Feeney.
I see.
Through my immediate supervisor, Nelson Hill, on behalf of Yang Enterprises, and the use by Yang Enterprises of unauthorized alien labor.
I tell him everything that went on at Yang's.
You tell them about the vote rigging software?
Yes.
You sure?
Yes.
In their report, it looks like you complained about the things that had to do with FDOT specifically.
Well, that's the things that he could touch on.
Ah.
And all the other stuff he was supposed to pass on to, like the NASA stuff. He was going to pass to NASA, and
What was he going to do with the
voting.
vote rigging stuff?
He was supposed to pass it out, I guess, to where it goes.
They claim that you didn't tell them.
Seems odd, doesn't it? They'd know about all the rest.
Ohio is a repeat of Florida.
Right.
And I know the Democrats enough to know that, they're not going to give up if they know they've got an inch anywhere.
Who went to the Supreme Court in 2000?
That would have been Bush.
What did he go for?
To make sure that he kept what was his.
To make sure he kept what was his?
Yeah.
Because
we had too many whining Democrats at the time.
Too much whining.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't, in the Supreme Court, it was the case no whining for Democrats, or was it something specific that they wanted?
No whining.
Yeah, they wanted to steal an election.
Bush Cheney wanted to steal the election?
No. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Don't. Whoa. Yeah, you got the
Okay,
names on the wrong side there.
He's playing this guy.
Boca Raton, Florida.
Florida? Did they go to the Supreme Court in 2000 and ask them to not count votes in Florida?
It's a yes or no answer. Did they?
I don't know.
Okay, the answer is yes, they did. And do you know what the Supreme Court said?
I know what the Supreme Court
What'd they
said.
say? That is what they said. And they said don't count the votes.
In the year 2000, the country failed abysmally in the presidential election process. There's no doubt in my mind that Al Gore was elected president. He received the most votes nationwide, and in my opinion, he also received the most votes in Florida.
As long as we
these
cannot
guys,
express
go ahead.
ourselves through the
Oh,
ballot
yeah, one sec.
box. I mean,
Go ahead.
I mean, both Kerry and Gore kind of walked away silently. I know, obviously it went to the Supreme Court and there was a little bit of a fight then, but compared now, like Donald Trump is not giving up. He's just insistent on it. These guys kind of just went away. Al Gore did his, the environment. We're all going to be dead by this time now. John Kerry, you don't even really hear anything from him anymore.
Right. He's still in the government, but he's not running for president. That's for sure.
Right. But you would think losing something as big deal as the presidency through fraud and through that method, you'd be a lot more vocal and a lot louder that this is something you really want. You campaign hard. I mean, from what I understand, these guys have like almost sleepless nights. They're in one town to the next on planes and buses, shaking hands and kissing babies everywhere. I mean, this is hard work just to kind of walk away from and say, I guess I lost.
Well, I remember some of the videos of Al Gore talking about it, and he seemed pretty upset. And then John Kerry, like I said, during the Don't Tase Me Bro video, acknowledged everything the kid was saying about voting machine irregularities. And he wanted to go ahead and talk to him. But at the same time, one of the things that was pointed out also by Don't Tase Me Bro kid was that you're in skull and bones, just like George Bush, right? Which has been uncovered to be the case, that there's these elite organizations, kind of like that you could say are part of the deep state in a way, where you have these groups of people that are all part of this secret fraternity that for some reason so many powerful people end up coming out the other side of. So you got to ask yourself, so how many of them were talked to, about what we're going to find out happened to one of Clint's associates and, how it might happen to them, and how many of them are just kind of in on it? They're part of it.
Right. I mean, I guess that's the thing. Like, hey, John, you're going to run against George, but, you're not going to win. But make it look good. Really go out there and give it your best. And, again, make it look good. But you're going to be rich when you're done. You're going to have some good positions throughout government, but you're not going to win. So, don't make a big deal of it once the election happens. Speak up a little bit here and there, acknowledge some things. But for the most part, keep quiet and don't do anything. And so again, I go back to Trump. I mean, he's clearly, if he's part of these skull and bones and organizations like that, he's really going to make them mad because he's not, just backing off. He's really loud and vocal about it. He really feels like he lost. And I mean, we know Trump's personality, but still, again, one group kind of, like I said, nonchalantly walked away, and that'd be Bush or Gore and Kerry. And Trump's over here just, screaming all day long about it. I find that interesting. I really do. And I know you pointed out that they seemed upset and that they did speak about it, but it just doesn't seem the fight that it should have been to lose something that big as a presidency. And I would also assume that it's like, okay, well, yeah, sure, the Republicans got theirs. Don't worry, the Democrats will get theirs soon enough. We'll have these guys in.
Right.
So,
yeah, and I'm not opposed to that at all. I agree that there's something up about it, but to me, it comes down to, were they threatened or were they just kind of in on it indirectly? Because at the end of the day, these people are too similar when it comes to things on a grand scale. Like I mentioned this in my video about why you should just be an independent and only join political parties if and when you want to vote for somebody during a primary, but never to allow yourself to surrender your personal beliefs to, or compromise or feel like you need to join a tribe. Like, don't let your political party be a tribe. It's a means to an end. And the reason why is because, your ideology, like the stuff that we fight over, like, I don't think, for example, that Nancy Pelosi or Paul Ryan or any of these people actually really give a shit about most of the culture war stuff. I don't think they care. It doesn't really affect their life. They want us to care about it, because then we're not paying attention when they do bigger things.
Right. When they give out huge contracts to their brother or their brother-in-law or
Right.
all
And
the
we
things
see
that they do.
that throughout history. I mean, like the Democratic Party used to be the party of the Ku Klux Klan. You know, these parties will morph to do whatever they got to do to win. And like it's the same thing with adopting the progressives, because the progressives were a threat to the Democratic Party at one point. I think it was Theodore Roosevelt who started the Progressive Party back then. Very similar, like, kind of proto way of thinking to things to what the current progressives do. But the point is that the Democrats eventually said, okay, well, if you guys will just stop running against us, we'll adopt your platform. That's essentially how these kinds of things get done. And ever since then, the relationship between the progressives and the Democrats, I always put up a meme that I made where it's like the abusive boyfriend that slaps you around a little bit during the primary. And then when the general shows up with flowers and chocolate and says, don't worry, I'll never do it again. I promise it'll be different. Please vote for our candidate. Right. And then that just happens every 4 years. And that's why, when people were trying to bully me into voting for Biden, I'm like, nah, you can kick rocks. That ain't happening. I don't vote for anybody who voted for Iraq. I don't vote for rapists. And if anybody wants to hear Tara Reid's story, Tara Reid came on my show. You can check it out on the YouTube channel, and I believe her. I don't vote for, people who voted for NAFTA. It's like there was just a mountain of reasons that I wasn't going to vote for Joe Biden that didn't have anything to do with Donald Trump, and they didn't have to do with Bernie. It's the same thing with Hillary Clinton. But anyway.
Yeah,
so
it's funny. I've seen the chat. People were talking about that term "don't tase me, bro," and how that was. I think if you also remember the whole Bush Kerry campaign, Kerry the whole all the flip flop jokes about John Kerry that were out there. He was a flip flopper, and they had all their different jokes. People taking flip flops at the rallies, things like that.
Right.
So yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
Yep, no problem.
With Albert Gore getting so many more popular votes than Bush in 2000. Well, in a normal country, that would be the election. And we should arrange our elections, really the winner wins, that's all, not go back to an 18th century trick.
Well, I disagree with that.
What is your name?
My name. What do you disagree with?
Him, he was basically saying we need the popular vote to do it, get rid of the electoral college. That's what he was alluding to there.
Right. We can talk about that at some point.
Yeah, but I definitely disagree.
What was that?
I said I definitely disagree with that, but go ahead.
Okay.
I didn't get it. Let me give you a surprise.
Okay.
In 2000,
Yeah.
I voted for Al Gore.
Yeah.
We're up against 21st century high-tech Jim Crow. As they realized that, the first time around, they beat people down, they lynched people until they could do that no more, and the people demanded they stop it. Now they've realized that if they go in and hide behind a clipboard and a suit and a technician in a private corporation, that they can go back to disenfranchising poor and minorities.
There was a recent commission that was put together headed by James A. Baker and Jimmy Carter. This commission came out and recommended photo IDs at the polls, requiring folks to have photo ID. Now, it sounds sensible enough until you take a look at it.
Now, take into account what we just heard. Jimmy Carter was one of the most progressive presidents in recent memory, and he was pushing for voter ID. That novel concept that maybe people should be able to prove they're American citizens before they vote.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's, and I think it comes up in here, so maybe I'll wait, but there's arguments about how that can still disenfranchise people, people who don't have IDs but are eligible to vote. For whatever reason, they don't have it. Mostly the theory there is poor, they just don't have the money to get down to a DMV and do it.
And we can talk about that later. My point was just to say, this is the left pushing for voter ID.
Right.
The thing that they call racist now, whether it is or not, again, we can do a whole show about voter ID sometime.
Right.
I'm just getting at that. It's interesting to hear Jimmy Carter. Now, mind you, I actually usually like Jimmy Carter quite a bit. The point is that I'm actually not opposed to the idea so long as we can make getting IDs something that everybody can do. That's not a problem. But the notion, I do think, however, and we'll get into it later, but it seems to me to be hard to really take any election seriously if you don't have to present ID.
Right. I don't like the government licensing me, just like we talked about in the show about marriage, the Father's Day show. I don't like marriage license. I don't like driver's license. It's interesting enough to not get too far off topic here, but you start licensing people and then it's a weapon against you. It's funny that they can suspend your license for one thing or another. You're perfectly capable of driving. You proved it. But without this little piece of plastic, all of a sudden you're not allowed to do it.
Well, right,
So,
and
you
yeah,
know,
we can talk about
and
those kinds of concepts, but I think at the end of the day, you would still at least agree we should have some way to validate if you're really a citizen or if you voted already, right?
I mean, if you can come up with something that doesn't require government licensing, I might agree. I'm having a hard time with that because, you know, again, that they suspend your license for some reason and you have to turn it in. Now you're disenfranchised and can't go vote.
Okay, well, no, and we can get into that, and we can get into that another time for sure. But to me, the biggest reason I paused it was only to state that this is a Democrat, former president, part of an effort to ensure that people actually have to have their ID before they vote.
Right.
So let's continue.
And you discover that anywhere from 10 to 20 million American voters don't have a driver's license, don't have photo IDs. And what do you know? They happen to be largely minorities, city dwellers, the elderly, the poor. Look, voter fraud is not a problem in this country. Election fraud is a huge problem. Voter fraud, you know, is something that the bad guys like to put out there as if it's a problem. In fact, for example, the League of Women's Voters did a study of the last 2 national elections in Ohio and found that of over 9 million votes cast, there was exactly 4 cases of voter fraud that was discovered.
Right. So,
not the people.
Go ahead.
So, I mean, if he's accurate, there's truth behind what he's saying, then he's making my point there. As he said, we don't have an issue with voter fraud. We have an issue with election rigging. We brought that up at the beginning of the show, did some clarification on that. And, you know, I don't know how accurate he is here. I'm going to take his word for it since he's been involved in this documentary and doing the research. But I'm using what he said to make the point. He talked about the poor, the elderly, people who don't have these IDs, who can't get them for some reason. But he then said that we don't have an issue with voter fraud. It's election rigging. Now,
Well, and
that doesn't mean
it's
we
more
won't
of a matter
ever.
of I think that election rigging, as far as the software, is way more relevant than being worried about who's registered to vote.
And I was going to say, and that doesn't mean we won't ever have voter fraud or never had it. I'm not suggesting that in either way. I'm saying for the case of this conversation and argument, we are talking about election rigging. And, you know, I don't, again, see the IDs as the problem to what might be considered voter fraud. So anyway, go on.
Right. Yeah, we can get it another time. Here we go.
It's the voting machine companies who are running these elections with secret software, who are privatizing it. It's the congressmen and the senators and the state officials who are allowing them to do so.
There's nothing quite so hot as a Georgia summer. But guess what? The Diebold machines break down in the heat. Now, I wonder if our illustrious Secretary of State, Kathy Cox, who wants to be the next governor of Georgia, first woman governor of Georgia, asked the question, how do the machines perform in the heat? If she had just asked that simple question, we would have had an alternative to the Diebold machines. But then by that time, of course, she had already allowed Diebold to place her photograph and the seal of the state of Georgia on their promotional materials. So she had become wedded to this particular system, which I think kind of is a conflict of interest.
He used to.
I'll say elections were stolen. In fact,
You
I
will?
think I did.
You think the election was stolen?
Absolutely.
In 2004?
Look at the exit polls, and they don't match the results. The same thing that we complained about when the Ukraine had their election,
right,
and actually made them have a new one.
Right.
Their exit polls were actually closer.
Wait a second. Election fraud in Ukraine?
Huh.
We
didn't have any involvement in that. You know, it's interesting enough, aside from the Ukraine, I was going to say, I remember Cynthia McKinney being mocked a lot during that whole time where she was part of saying that there was this election fraud going on. And also, a little side note here, Diebold, I believe it was 2006, maybe 2007, before they sold to the other company, decided to do this one little thing, which was remove their logo from the front of the voting machines and put it on the back. Kind of figured that nobody trusted them anymore, so they would move their logo so people didn't see it.
Right. Yeah, well, why wouldn't they trust them? Imagine that.
Yeah, right.
Could there be any reason why? I mean, I don't know. So I'm noticing a little bit of choppiness on our stream. I'm sorry, guys. I thought I fixed it, and it's still nowhere near as bad as it was before. But I think some of it is my internet, which unfortunately I can't really control. My internet is usually great, but but it seems like it's still watchable. So if it really becomes a problem, I may see if Brian can host it and see if that changes anything. So, all right, we ready to continue?
Let's rock and roll.
On ours.
In fact, in the states that had electronic voting, the numbers didn't match at all with the exit polling. But in states where they had paper, what do you know? The exit polls and the final results were almost perfect.
I have no doubt John Kerry won the election in Ohio.
Okay. Now, had John Kerry won the election in Ohio, John Kerry would be the president.
Sure. To say that those exit polls were so far off just didn't happen. Something else happened. And I say that as someone who has a PhD in political science and has worked in campaigns. People who came out and thought they voted for Kerry, their votes weren't counted,
right,
or somebody actually tampered with the vote count.
So the Yang folks,
Right.
Feeney and the are sort of harassing Mavis?
Are getting DOT to harass Mavis because Nelson Hill, who works for DOT, is also Feeney's puppy. When they were harassing her, I wrote back to the head IG, Cecil Bragg, and said, "You're not doing anything on the investigation. Why not?" And the next business day, their response was they fired me and Mavis at the same time.
Clint is fired at 10 in the morning. I'm fired at like 2:30 that afternoon.
Instead of investigating this company, instead of putting the brakes on what's going on, they're actually writing letters of recommendation for that company,
Correct.
Yang.
Correct.
And saying that you're removed.
Correct.
Tom Feeney's fingerprints are all over this thing?
Yes. Yes.
Literal fingerprints.
Literal fingerprints. I mean, read the public record. Read the public record. I don't want anyone to take my word for anything, Brad. Get the documents and read the record. And when you read a memo from Nelson Hill's secretary to him stating that Mr. Feeney wants this letter signed today, and this letter is a recommendation for Yang Enterprises, and the following day, after Mr. Hill executes this letter of recommendation, he is suddenly promoted to Deputy CIO for the State Technology Office.
Nelson Hill is promoted the
Yes.
day after he writes this letter.
The letter of recommendation for Yang Enterprises.
Had they had any problems with you prior to this investigation?
I believe in January of 2001, I received an outstanding evaluation that went into a lot of detail as to the value of my services to the department.
And how long had you been with the department?
I began with the department in '88.
88?
Yes.
So
I'd been with the department for...
almost 15 years
yes,
at this point.
Yes. The department did an agency cleansing of any corporate knowledge concerning the problems with the Yang contract.
How many people were fired?
A half dozen other than Clint and myself.
So anybody who was involved with the Yang contract is now
Correct.
gone?
Correct.
In fact, on her, they tried to get her to sign a little paper saying she resigned.
Did she sign it?
She signed the resign one, and she kept the one where it said you're fired. So when it went to court, when they said, well, she resigned voluntarily, we didn't do anything about it, she could produce a paper showing that they're just flat out lying.
She filed a whistleblower suit.
Yes.
And she won the case.
She won the case.
What I began to do was to look into all the pieces of Clint Curtis' story, all the claims that he's made. And the more you look, the more paper trail there is that backs up Clint Curtis's assertions.
So, I mean, it's
in
there.
2004, the Florida Department of Transportation's...
What were you going to say?
It's there. It's out in the open, like he's saying. The paper trail backs up these claims. I mean, she filed a whistleblower suit and won.
Right.
And it's still brushed under the rug. Like people are just like, It
Passed
says what
polygraph examiner, examination. I mean, the whole thing is, I've talked to the guy. He's legit. Continue what you were saying.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole time watching this. It just continues to frustrate me because it's there. This is no longer a conspiracy theory. It's a flat out conspiracy and nobody's doing anything about it.
And the funny thing is that now because Trump has mentioned it and it's been made out to be as crazy as it was. And then we had incompetent people like Giuliani and whatever the other lawyer's name handling this issue instead of, like, say talking to Clint Curtis before Congress again, that it now is a topic that gets you Alex Jones or QAnon, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's very convenient that they've gotten this issue labeled something crazy, because then they don't ever have to defend it. But it comes down to just basic understanding. There's no such thing as a computer that cannot be reprogrammed. Period. Ever. Under any circumstances. There is no way to do that. Right? One way or the other, it can be altered. That's the reason why, when I brought him on my show, he said the same thing. Hand counted paper ballots, publicly viewable while being counted at all times. And we'll get into that later. But
right.
So here we go.
Well,
oh, go ahead.
Quick, I haven't voted probably, if I have to think about it, since 2012. And when it gets brought up locally, when I talk to people, even if it's, on the air like this, usually, I tell people for the reason I haven't voted, which is the true reason, is because I don't need to vote in rigged elections. What's the point? Generally, the people I know around me kind of have that roll their eyes type look to them, like, yeah, okay, and then you hear well, if you don't vote, you don't get a say. And then I have to laugh and say, what, you really think you have a say in what goes on? And if you think you do, this is just right here. What we're doing right now is one example of how you don't. And I say one example, and I want to point that out. We're just using one example of how you don't have a say. So I have no shame and do not care in any way that I do not vote anymore because, again, the elections are rigged. What's the point?
I think that at this point, it really comes down to the election's purpose is almost like a straw poll so that the elites know what's important to us so that they can accommodate us to a certain degree, right? Like, that's something that George Carlin used to say, was that he feels that basically all of the progress that we've made have been accommodations by the elite to keep us satisfied enough that we don't do anything, right?
Right. It's like you vote for your captors to feed you and give you water, and you vote for steak dinner, and what they give you is bread and water.
Right.
So you're saying, like, yeah, well, they voted to be fed, so we fed them.
Well, and then they select the candidates, and again, it's like the South Park joke of turd sandwich and giant douche. It is a joke, but it's not. But the candidates just keep getting worse.
Well, that's the other thing. I mean, that's the other thing I was thinking. These two parties, what they're offering us. So what we had was George Bush and Dick Cheney and John Kerry and John Edwards. Those were our choices. No thank you to either one. Like, it's like, even without voter fraud, we lose in that case. I mean, every time they show John Edwards standing in the background, I just remember going, oh my God, we can't have these guys in the White House either. At that time, I mean, the guy looks like he belongs in a sitcom, not in politics.
Right.
So anyway,
well, yeah, and then they'll do things. I mean, that's the other aspect of it. Like, do you remember they were? I can't find them, but there were these time lapse videos that kept track of how long the candidates used to get to talk. Like during a 2-hour debate, when one of them, Hillary, got an hour, Obama came in second, and Mike Gravel got like 5 minutes.
Right.
That's why I used to joke, I feel like a potted plant over here, because they wouldn't talk to him, and that's because he openly spoke about how the war is bad. Kucinich, well, we can't have that guy talking because he's talking about impeaching George Bush and Dick Cheney and how bad the Iraq war is and how bad the Patriot Act is. Can't have Ron Paul talking. He might dare to suggest that maybe the people of Iraq are not bombing us because they're free. We're free. Maybe it's because we've been bombing their country, or or whatever. He didn't even say Iraq. He was just talking about the Middle East in general, right? We can't have that, right? So that's one of the reasons why I did my show, A Danger to Our Democracy, and I put "our" in quotes, because there was this bizarre video that, I call it video, but all over the country, the media was reading like from the same teleprompter, and it was all of the companies, ABC, MSNBC, Fox News, all of them were reading from this like prepared statement that also said, this is extremely dangerous to our democracy. And somebody took all of these videos and networked them together, and it sounded like the Borg talking, like the multiple voice. This is extremely dangerous to our democracy. And you hear like 100 voices saying it. They all said the exact same thing.
Right. And plenty of those montages of news channels just saying the same thing.
Right. But I mean, when you think about it, before the internet, you know, and that's like, I mean, our generation of activists was kind of the first to see the internet because, like, Obama was good at using the internet. The internet is probably the only reason Ron Paul even existed and in the mind of people at the time. I know the internet is the only reason I met Mike Gravel. It's, you know, like, you know, before the internet, they could just control whoever was heard about. I mean, they truly owned our democracy before the internet because the debates were everything. And if you couldn't get in, you basically didn't exist. Things have changed now, and that's why they need to figure out ways to manipulate us. So,
And after Ross Perot, they were like, "Oh no, we are never letting a third party candidate, up on that stage again."
right?
They saw that as one of their biggest mistakes as well. And you know, you kind of miss him in his charts every time he got to talking, pull out a chart and his little pointer and give you a chart on how he's going to fix things.
Well, the funny thing is, you can watch his videos still on YouTube, and everything he said was going to happen to our economy happened.
Right.
All of it.
Well, I mean, you know, Ron Paul, he's pretty much up there and predicting it as well.
Yeah.
You know, you can predict the overall thing. The little nuances are a little harder to predict. But, I mean, as you said, as you paused it, the candidates stink and they get worse and worse. I know you were a Bernie fan. As a libertarian watching the primaries for the Democrats, the way I felt about it is, you know, no skin in that game for me, obviously. But Biden would have been the worst candidate they could choose when it started. That's what I thought. And I even said, since he's the worst they have, he's going to get the nomination. And sure enough, he did. You know, obviously, I know you thought Bernie was the best they had. I thought Tulsi was the best they had. Either
I
way,
would have accepted Tulsi.
yeah, exactly.
She was a
Either
good
way,
choice.
the American people and particularly the Democrat voters, they got the worst that the party had to offer.
Well, and because I voted for and donated to Bernie, I get text messages from the Democratic Party or emails all the time, and I always answer them the same way. There were 3 people that are the reason I was ever interested in your party: Bernie Sanders, Tulsi Gabbard, and Andrew Yang. What do they all have in common? None of them are in your party anymore. Please stop messaging me.
But Neil, we need your money. We can't rig elections without it.
Right, exactly. Let's keep going.
Yeah.
Audit of Yang Enterprises found $850,000 in questioned and qualified costs. Of that amount, Yang was asked to repay $132,000 pending further investigation. Hello, Phoenix. We've got a huge show for you today. Diebold whistleblower Stephen Heller, in his first live broadcast interview. Stephen Heller was charged with 3 felony counts for releasing secret Diebold legal documents that he came across while he was working as a temp at Diebold's Los Angeles law firm, Jones Day.
I believe in my heart, even though I hadn't quite admitted it to myself, as soon as I saw them, those documents, I think I knew I was going to eventually release them.
You can't really talk about what those documents were that you printed out, right?
That's true, Brad. Those documents were attorney-client privilege information, and that's why I got arrested in the first place. And even now, if I were to talk about the content, I could be at risk of getting myself in trouble again.
All right. Can I talk about the content?
You can say anything you want.
I will.
All right.
Diebold was asking legal advice about having secretly installed uncertified software on voting machines to be used in the 2004 California election. It was a clear violation of the law.
No one in America in the press was covering this issue. So I thought if I send all these documents to some reporter who doesn't know anything about the issue, they're likely to end up in the trash can. I knew I had to get them to somebody who had the press connections and the government connections to do something with these documents, and that obviously was Bev Harris of Black Box Voting.
I started reading the leaked Diebold memos, which had been around everywhere on the internet. But at a certain point of time, I realized it has to live in a memory card. I knew already that it's against the FEC rules. It should not be there. And I say, well, that would be a problem because this memory card is proprietary. I said, well, no, it's not. I have seen this guy before. And he actually went on immediately and wrote to Diebold and got in written response saying, this memory card is proprietary technology by Diebold. It's not available from anywhere else. So
Diebold told them in a letter that this was
I
proprietary.
actually saw the letter. So I said, no. You know, I have almost photographic memory. I know I have seen this guy before. Actually, it took me 2 weeks to figure out what the memory card was. And then it all of a sudden clicked. It's the Tandy old machine. The original first patent ever made about a laptop computer.
By Tandy?
Tandy. And this is the memory unit. It's an Epson memory card. That's from the patent I got the name, Epson memory card. Now I know who you are. So after I knew what it is, I spent $130. I got the reader.
Because of its design, the Diebold touchscreen machine proved vulnerable to a 20-year-old hack, the old bootloader hack.
There's nothing worse than bootloader hack. And honestly, I haven't seen these kind of things to happen in 20 years.
This you can do. You've confirmed this, on the Diebold touchscreen TSX machine.
This is confirmed by me, and proof of concept was written by Princeton University, so you have independent verification for my finding.
In 2006, a Princeton University professor and 2 graduate students confirmed what Harry Hursty had already proven. They posted their demonstration on YouTube, hacking the Diebold touchscreen machine in less than 1 minute's time.
I remember
they
these
inserted a
videos.
vote-flipping virus that changed vote tallies, would spread to other machines, and flip an election without leaving a trace.
You would hope that they didn't steal the last election, but, you know, if they did, I guess the outcome would have been completely different if we had a different president. War in Iraq probably wouldn't have happened, most likely. That's the biggest impact, I think.
This is a national security issue.
That is correct. It's a national
Why is it a
security issue.
national security issue?
Of course, for the reason being that you actually decide for who are going to make the decisions for the future. I mean, everything to do with the votings are national security level issues in all the countries, not only in the US. One of the good election supervisors, his second in command, who was responsible in office for IT and security, came to me and said, I don't understand what you guys are doing. What is this big fuss about this, you know, these machines can be hacked? Of course they can be hacked. We are not counting here real things like money.
What did you say to him when he said that to you?
Well, basically I say, perhaps you should think about how much money people are using in campaigns alone. Perhaps they wouldn't be using if this wouldn't be a real thing like money.
According to a report in Rolling Stone magazine, Jack Abramoff's lobbying firm Greenberg Traurig was paid $275,000 by Diebold just before the passage of the Help America Vote Act, or HAVA, of 2002. Abramoff took the author of HAVA, Congressman Bob Ney, on a lavish golfing trip to Scotland. Both Abramoff and Ney have since been convicted of felonies relating to these matters and are currently serving time in prison. Bob Ney is a felon and currently can't vote in the state of Ohio. Yet we're stuck with his bill.
This whole mess began, our latest chapter begins with this Help America Vote Act, $3.8 billion federal act, has now put these machines out all over the map with little or no oversight.
Approximately 80% of the votes in the United States of America are counted by Diebold or ES&S.
We have to fix this. Not for the US sakes alone, while I love the United States of America, but also for the global sake, because otherwise this will just keep on spreading.
They're picking up our technology, the things that we're doing in our elections.
Actually, US companies are trying to sell it very aggressively to the Europe and to a number of places where democracy hasn't been very strongly going.
So,
Hey,
like,
Europe, look how you can rig an election. Let us show you. Exactly.
right, right, exactly. And as Clint Curtis pointed out to me, because like he talked to me considerably after this documentary was made, like years later, he's talked to a lot of countries, and like we are now one of the few countries left that even uses these things. Like that's just, and that's like he said, they're trying to sell it very aggressively. This guy was actually in Uncounted, which is another documentary about this topic. You should be able to find it on YouTube. And he just did the hack. He showed the hack because an election officer was saying, can you please demonstrate this for me? And then he did it. And the guy in his job as an election officer was to be able to figure out and be sure that the election was fine. He looked at it and said, Jesus, I'd have totally certified this. I would have had no idea. Right. So if you ever want to watch more about this, it's a video called Uncounted. You can find that documentary also on YouTube. So anyway, ready?
Let's do it.
I mean, ES&S is selling to Hungary, ES&S is selling to England. Also, a number of the manufacturers are using different brand names when they sell their machines globally.
Isn't that at the heart of this privatization of our public election system?
I think so, and I think it's a horrible idea. I just can't understand why anyone would think that in the United States it's a good idea to let a private corporation run our elections for us in secret, using secret machines and secret software. That's insanity. We should never allow that. All votes must be on a paper ballot, and there must be complete transparency in all machines used to process or tabulate those votes.
Did you vote on paper or electronic
Electronic.
machine? What makes you think it was counted accurately?
Well, we've been doing electronic voting a lot longer in some of the other states.
Did you get a paper receipt when you voted?
No, I didn't get a receipt.
So what makes you think it was counted accurately?
Well, then I guess maybe it wasn't.
I think the last election was stolen, for sure. And now there's some question of those voting machines and who is the people that own them. They're owned by, supposedly, I heard, friends of Dick Cheney.
In an infamous fundraising letter to supporters in the summer of 2003, Diebold CEO Wally Odell promised to deliver Ohio's electoral votes to George W. Bush. Friendly gesture.
To simply assume that we don't steal votes in the United States is patently absurd.
In Mahoning County, where Youngstown is located, and this is verified by the Board of Elections themselves, 20 to 30 touchscreen voting machines recorded votes for candidates opposed to those selected by the voters, always jumping from Democrat to Republican. I can think of no other way this could have happened except this, that these touchscreen machines were programmed to default to candidate Bush. And if you did not override the default choice of that computer, you would be voting for Bush.
As for investigating the 2004 presidential election in Ohio, despite a court order, 56 out of 88 Ohio counties destroyed some or all of their ballots from that election.
It's like organized crime. I mean, right? Organized crime, people, when they don't understand organized crime doesn't go out and steal $1 million. What they steal is they steal a little every day. And I think that's what the Republicans understand, is that if you don't get too greedy and you steal some votes in Warren County, you steal some votes in Claremont County, you have some computer glitch problem here and there, suddenly you've got your votes. That's why you have to have checks and balances. You have to have full transparency. Right. You have to have nonpartisan people who get paid decent salaries and don't want to be fired. Look, I mean, we understand this with slot machines in Vegas. We heavily regulate them. We tear them down on the spot. We send people in with spot checks, rip the machines apart to make sure they're fair. We don't do it with our voting machines, just with our slot machines.
The key thing here is, if we want to immediately increase the level of security, you will start by releasing these absentee ballots. Because in state of California on average, in basically every county, 30% of the voters are absentees. You have very solid evidence if the rest of the bunch doesn't fall in the same line.
You're saying release those things already right now. We're already scanning them with the optical scanners that have the image. Release those images.
And since this doesn't really need more new legislation, you can start doing it right now.
How would one keep this from happening? The ability to steal an election?
Non-proprietary source code.
Right.
Non-proprietary hardware, because you can hide it in the hardware. Random checks.
You'd be okay with all of that?
Sure. Because you got to have random checks. Because right now they have to wrestle over what their recount is. Well, you should have automatic recounts on, so many % of the vote just to make sure your machines are working. Because if they're not working, you don't have the right vote.
Well, you never know.
Well, and you could.
The electronics or the computers are going to be.
Yeah, he also has revised his position about this, by the way. He now is just, nope, fuck it, hand-counted ballots, don't screw around with it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, again, I could still see how you can fraud hand-counted ballots, but if we get to interview him, we can get into that. Just exactly, he said it, and the other guy said it, talking about how slot machines and what they go through, and we don't do that with the voting machines. Non-proprietary machines, non-proprietary software. You print out 2 receipts when the person's done voting. The person gets one that shows who they're voting for, and then you give one to the election. You put it in a box, and basically now you have a checks and balances. You have the receipt that the person verified, checks off on, and puts it in the box. Now you say the machine says this person got this many votes. you go count the paper receipts that were put in the box and see that it matches, you're good. Now your voting machine works because you have non-proprietary software, non-proprietary hardware. You have random checks, and you have this dual receipt coming out, one that the voter gets and one that the election station gets to count as well. So that would, I mean, we're in a digital age. It's at some point, you can have machine voting, digital voting, and you can have it safely. We just got to want to. I mean, that's the thing. Again, as we were talking about earlier in the show, we seem to just kind of shrug our shoulder at this kind of information. Like, so what? What can I do about it? Obviously, demand better technology, better software, better machines, better checks and balances, better random checks on the machines. Those would be what you could do about it at the end. I mean, for a society that's moving all digital, where you can order pizza through your Amazon Alexa, you should be able to have some digital voting without worry. Blockchain technologies here, we could get into that and how that could also be part of it. So I mean, I wouldn't be 100% against machine voting. I'm against it when it's exactly like they're talking about here. The software is proprietary, the hardware is proprietary. Nobody's even going in and checking these things. There's no independent audit or checks on the code or the machines. It's just, hey, we have this machine and software. Trust us, it works. And everybody's like, okay, bring it in.
Right. Yep, exactly. Yeah, because there's so many, and that's one of the things they revealed in Uncounted was just that there are still situations in which you could figure out a way to get that, that code into the machine. And that's exactly what, like he was pointing out, the Dutch guy, I think he was Dutch, was pointing out the memory cards. The memory cards, like literally, are something that anybody can get their hands on. And if you can do that, you can insert that's how he inserted the computer virus that he wrote into the machine to demonstrate that it could be done. I've heard stories, and I haven't actually followed up on it, but I've heard that people have been able to hack into these things with their phones, stuff like that. I haven't been able to confirm that, but I guess we'll see. But to those of you who are listening again, this is going to get pretty dark. So be aware that as we go forward here and we get to the people who have a vested interest in covering up this information, it's going to get pretty crazy.
Right. And before we go on, Neil, I just want to, thank everybody for tuning in and listening, and remind them to head over. I'm sure most of them have subscribed to V Radio. But if you haven't, if you're listening over at Liberty Unleashed, get over and give V Radio a subscribe. And if you're listening on V Radio, head over to Liberty Unleashed YouTube channel and give us a subscribe. We appreciate all the support. Both of us have to claw and fight our way to get seen and heard on YouTube, as we're not fans of YouTube. So your support is how we do it. And telling your friends and family about us is also another way of doing it. But thank everybody for tuning in. And as Neil said, be prepared. It does get a little graphic here.
Yep.
Are you doing it correctly? And if the programs are right, I guess you just have to, have faith that they will be.
I think we got to make sure that all the votes are counted. I personally am committed to counting all the votes myself. I think I could do a better job than some of these machines are doing.
In my mind, silver bullet means a solution where you don't have to trust anyone. You can verify that the vote you cast was recorded accurately. You can verify that your vote was counted, and you can verify that your vote was part of the total. So you can access every single turning point, every single process point of the election process, and see that my vote is going through there.
So if we have to count the paper to be absolutely sure about the machine.
Go ahead.
Nobody told that guy I just said that.
Oh, yeah.
Count anyway, then what do we need the machines for in the first place?
It's a tool. It's not a god, it's a tool. Now that I'm fired, I apply for jobs, Programmer, been at NASA, worked with ExxonMobil, worked with DOT, can't find a job anywhere. I end up stocking shelves at the dollar store. So,
really?
Yeah.
All right.
So I'm thinking I'm not getting a real good recommendation from Yang and DOT.
So now you're working at the dollar store.
Working at the dollar store, stocking shelves. And Lemmy shows up.
Raymond Lemmy.
Just comes in sometime, and he's staring at me over the top of these little...
Now, real quick, guys, this is when the shit starts, so pay close attention to what he's getting ready to say, because this gets deadly serious very quickly.
potato chip type holder. I walked over and said, "Can I help you?" And he said, "No, I'm just shopping." And he leaves.
Okay.
And then he comes in again, tells me that he's been working on the case on the side.
He's looking into this on his own now?
On his own.
For fun?
I don't know.
Why? What's he going to do with this information if he's not doing it in
I
an
guess if he
efficient
gets
fashion?
enough of it, he thinks he can pop it somewhere. I don't know. So he keeps coming in and asking me questions about vote rigging and spies, and I don't know necessarily what he wants, so I just answer whatever he asks. This was a big case that he was making headway on. It wasn't an official case because officially DOT was going to do nothing because Feeney wouldn't let him do anything. So I give him information, but he didn't give a lot back.
Was he a friend of yours by that point?
Not really. I liked the fact that he was actually working on it.
Right.
But I didn't necessarily know how much he was working on it and how much he was working on me.
And what does he say?
He's got it all ready to bundle up. He's going to pop the news in a couple of weeks, and I'll just be thrilled with the results. And I said, you know, you better tell somebody.
You better tell someone? Why?
These people were not nice.
Clint indicated to me that Ray Lemmy had told him that it was much bigger, that what he was investigating was much bigger and went higher.
Clint said this to you?
Yes, Clint said that to me.
When he said all the way to the top, who did you think he was? Who was the top?
I was thinking Bush. I didn't know whether it was just Jeb Bush or whether it went farther than that. From Feeney's conversations, he thought he was right with Bush.
Feeney said that he was
Yes.
right with Bush.
Right. Both George and Jeb, so.
Lemmy says to you, this corruption goes all the way to the top.
Right. And all I have to do is wait a couple weeks and I'll be thrilled with the results.
So you waited a couple weeks.
And he turned up dead in a Georgia motel room.
What he was investigating was much bigger.
When he said all the way to the top, who did you think he was?
I was thinking Bush. My first thought was they killed him.
How did you feel about that?
Guilty.
You felt guilty?
Yeah. If I hadn't brought it to him, then he wouldn't have gotten involved.
What was
They
the
don't
cause
have-
of death?
They said suicide, but they don't do autopsies in Georgia.
Did
If he died in Florida, it's an automatic autopsy.
You mean if
How
a
convenient.
suicide occurred in
Right.
Florida, it would be an automatic autopsy?
Automatic
But
autopsy.
A suicide in Georgia, not mandatory?
Not mandatory.
It
Right.
would have had to have occurred had he been killed in, not been killed.
Well, my speculation is he offended somebody and he got killed.
You feel he got killed?
Yes.
Um,
Because the hotel he was at is this real secluded, tree lines on both sides. It's a little shabby $23 a night hotel. If you wanted to kill yourself, why not stop somewhere in Florida?
he was working out of Tallahassee, Florida.
He was
right?
working out of Tallahassee. So he
You
had
were
to-
in Tallahassee at the
Right.
time. Then there's Valdosta, which is just
Hour and a half away.
Hour and a half away. It's sort of a border town in Georgia.
Yeah, it's up a ways. There are a lot of hotels you could have stopped at Georgia prior to getting to Valdosta. The whole thing's just wrong. There's a report that he called into DOT at 6:45 in the morning, and yet they have him killing himself 38 minutes later, even though it's another hour to get to Valdosta. Supposedly he's in the motel room one night,
Right.
but there's 2 receipts.
In the police report, it says one is a check-in receipt, the other is a check-out receipt.
If he killed himself, he didn't check out.
Well, have you not checked into a motel room where they charge you up front? In other words, they check you in and check you out at the same time?
On different days? I don't think they do that.
Yeah, there's another problem with that. The first receipt is dated June 29, 2003. He was in Tallahassee June 29, 2003. He didn't kiss his wife goodbye, as she says, until June 30th, 2003, 6:15 a.m.
Who's in the room on June 29th? In the hotel room, they found a blank, legal pad,
Okay.
and an empty file folder. And
Right.
every time he'd come talk to me, he'd have his little yellow pad and his little file folder full of papers.
Are you suggesting that?
The papers are gone, yes.
And you're suggesting that somebody took those papers?
Would you take a legal pad and a manila folder to a suicide?
Maybe he wanted to have write a suicide note.
Oh, the note's weird too, because he
do you
didn't
mean?
talk about his daughter. And the daughter was just about to be married.
He mentioned his wife.
Right.
By name. He has one child, a daughter.
Daughter.
He does not mention her.
Does not mention her. But every time we talked At the dollar store, part of the conversation was, you know, how's your daughter? She's doing good. You know, she's getting married, you know.
Doesn't mention her in his suicide note. Mentions his wife. Did he sign his suicide note?
Didn't sign it. He put a time on it.
The police say they took photographs, but due to a failure in the camera's flash memory, there would be no photographs.
Right.
We've recently seen that there are, in fact, photographs.
That conflict the police report.
That do conflict the police report.
The Valdosta police report alleged there was no blood on the towel and no visible trauma to the body. The photographs of Raymond Lemmy seem to suggest otherwise.
And Valdosta.
No trauma to the body. But let me rewind that again. Again, viewer discretion is advised, but this is what I'm known for.
And no visible trauma.
Let's get to that clip real quick.
The photographs of Raymond Lemmy.
Does that look like a guy who slashed his wrist to kill himself?
I mean, it's hard to tell by the photo, but I would still have to say it's a little suspicious, without a doubt.
No, I would call it a lot of suspicious. Do you cut your shirt up when you're killing yourself with a razor blade?
Right. And I mean, obviously everything, you know, the report that they didn't get photos because of the memory card, and gee, you know, all of a sudden they show up. Wow, gee, so you did or you didn't have photos? And obviously he does this in a state, as he was pointed out, plenty of hotel rooms in between his house and this city, but he does it in a state where they don't do an autopsy for suicide. So what is curious, though, is why his family couldn't have his body brought back if it was suicide, if it wasn't a crime, and then have the autopsy done in Florida.
Right, exactly.
So that was never mentioned, and I'm curious. But yes, it does definitely look like this is a little bit more messy of a scenario than just a sit in a bathtub and slit your wrist.
Absolutely.
Seem to suggest otherwise.
And Valdosta police have confirmed that these photographs are real, and that due to interest on the internet in December of 2004, they reopened the case of Raymond Lemmy. Also around that time, they spoke with someone at the Florida Department of Transportation, and that they closed the case shortly thereafter. Now, they won't tell me who it is they talked to at the Florida Department of Transportation. They told me over and over and over that they were not stonewalling me, and then they didn't call me back ever again.
And remember, they're in Valdosta, Georgia. So what the hell does the Florida Department of Transportation have to do with an investigation that they're doing at a Georgia police department? So the fact that a call from someone at FDOT would lead to shutting down the investigation in Georgia, you know, I don't know if there's anything sinister there or not,
but Jeb Bush was the governor at the time. Feeney was a state house guy in Florida at the time. You know, so go ahead.
And how does the Department of Transportation of one state have that much power? I mean, how does the Department of Transportation have power in any state to shut down a suicide or criminal investigation?
Right.
Particularly one that happened in a hotel and didn't even happen on a highway. So all of a sudden, the Department of Transportation of Florida has enough power to call somebody in Georgia and say, don't do this.
Right. Let's continue.
Yeah.
But it sure doesn't smell right.
The time to know what really happened may have passed us by. And I am not a forensic specialist in criminology or anything else, and I would not hazard a guess.
6 weeks after Lemmy died, Tom Feeney went golfing at St. Andrews in Scotland. He was the special guest of super lobbyist Jack Abramoff.
After Lemmy turned up dead and things were not moving along very well, I went ahead and wrote a book and put it out there. I hadn't even published the book, and I get this email that it says something about, like, they know about the book, you know, don't be alone.
Are you worried about somebody taking your life?
If it's wrong, you have to do the right thing, no matter what it costs.
Aren't you just doing this to sell books? Making these outrageous claims?
No longer outrageous. Most of it's already been proven now.
Well, nonetheless,
in fact,
though,
I think you found most of the proof.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it afford to fail. It's not an option. Democracy is not something we can play with. It's not a partisan game. There is nothing in our country, in our history, more sacred than freedom and democracy.
We're told in this country that vigilance is the price of freedom. Walk together, children. Don't get worried and don't get weary.
When this story broke publicly, did the media break down your door to try to figure out what the hell was going on here?
In reference to the voting, you're the only person who may have contacted me.
CNN never called?
No.
AP?
No.
60 Minutes?
No.
Major mainstream media has not touched this affidavit story, which is at the heart of what we're looking at here.
I assume they're afraid. I mean, they did it in Dan Rather. That's pretty impressive. So, you know, how safe do you feel compared to Dan Rather?
This thing matters, and I don't care which side of the political spectrum you're on. I say frequently when I speak, this is not about left and right. This is about right and wrong.
We have become numb to unethical behavior. Our lives are very difficult. We're clinging on to our middle class by our fingernails.
Right. Yeah. And then since this situation she's talking about has only gotten worse. But I will have to say, being V Radio, I really like that. It's just not like, left versus right. This is right versus wrong. And it's really important, again, that everybody not get too partisan about this and think that your party is immune to being willing to do something like this. All the political parties are completely corrupt organizations. All of them have a vested interest in screwing up the democratic process. None of them are mentioned in the Constitution. None of them were intended to exist by the founding fathers who left, England largely to escape riots and assassinations because of fights between political parties. Sound familiar? Keep all that in mind. What were you going to say, Brian?
Oh, I just, she's saying exactly what I think I've been saying all show. We're numb to it. We're very apathetic. And, they talked about vigilance and that people have to be vigilant and do the right thing. And it's just, we're too caught up in, American Idol's not on anymore, but we were more focused on who was going to win American Idol than who was going to win at the different levels of our state in terms of politics go. And, as you talk about the parties, people just go in there. Generally, if they're a Democrat, they pull the lever for all Democrat. If they're Republican, they pull that lever for all Republican. And no longer does policy matter. No longer do the merits of the person and candidate matter. It's about my team over your team, my team versus your team. And the saying that I keep hearing from either side is, oh, well, we're better off with this, my candidate, my team's candidate, than that other team's candidate. Without even really addressing the policy or the merits of that person.
Do you remember the video we used to share all the time? And I've reused it since. I don't know if it's still on YouTube, but it's called Why Ron Paul Didn't Win the Florida Primary or something like that. And this guy is going around a beach with a microphone, interviewing different people, not trying to get them to vote for Ron Paul, just asking them who they voted for and why. And all of in most cases, the voters in question really didn't have any understanding. Like, they talked to an African-American gentleman and he asked, well, who you voted? Who did you vote for? He's like, well, Barack Obama. And he's like, can you tell me what your favorite policy from Barack Obama is? And he said he couldn't think of any. Right. And mind you, that's just one guy. That the whole video was embarrassing. Both the Republicans and the Democrats that guy talked to on the beach usually had no idea. One of them said, well, who did you vote for? He said Hilton. And the guy's wife teases him, there is no Hilton. He couldn't even say Clinton. Like, he didn't even know the name of the person he was fucking voting for, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so, it's just like listening to people and, you ask why you like a particular candidate. And you're like, well, I think he's good on foreign policy. Like, what foreign policy? How? Meaning you want him to go to war or you don't want him to go to war? Or what do you mean by that? It's just such a soundbite answer and has no meaning to it. But when you try to question and get the meaning behind it, they really don't have an answer for it. I don't expect people to be economists and completely understand how economies are supposed to run. I don't expect people to, know everything about politics, but you've got to have some kind of basis on why you would choose somebody. You got to be pro-war or anti-war. You got to be for high taxes and government spending or for low or no taxes and very limited government spending. And if that's the case, and you are those people, then you should definitely know whether your favorite team, your party, is for that or not. And, you know, more so your favorite party, but the candidates for these parties, you really should know their position. And I know, we both know that candidates say one thing and then they get into an office and do another thing. I'm pretty sure I can find a clip of George Bush talking about the evils of the IRS and we need to get rid of it. And of course, he didn't do anything near that in any way.
Well, he
So,
was
you
running
know,
against McCain back when McCain was the maverick, and McCain called him out for his positions because he used to claim that we don't invade countries and nation build. Like George Bush said that, meaning Jr., on the
Right.
debate stage. We shouldn't be invading countries and nation building or policing the world. And then later on, McCain's like, hey, wait a minute here. What did you say? You know, like, and because back then, it's hilarious to me, actually, like, you know, being a 2008 like era activist, was that McCain was in documentaries that I would share on VTV that like literally calling out imperialism and how much he transformed. But anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead and finish what you were saying, and we'll get back.
you made my point. I mean, that exactly that whole George Bush and foreign policy. I mean, it makes the point. It almost doesn't matter. You know, they will say one thing and do another when they get into office. And I think, you know, we like that slick car salesman candidate. We really like that guy who can talk a talk, and we don't have to think about the policies. And, you know, that's the whole thing. Like with Ron Paul, there was so often where people would say, well, I like him, but he doesn't look or act very presidential.
What the fuck does that mean?
You know?
Or he has no chance of winning, so let me vote for the candidate that holds literally none of my beliefs.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I don't want to
Like
vote for a loser.
Are you winning at that point? Like, if you voted for the candidate and he wins that does not hold any of your beliefs, did you win anything with your vote? Like, that's just, it's like people are so obsessed with not being a loser, I guess, that you're going to vote for whoever, right?
But you're still going to be the loser. Like, okay, so you don't want to vote for Ron Paul. You want to vote for McCain or Romney. Well, they still lost. Right? So you're still the loser in that. It's not like you were like you went from Ron Paul to Barack Obama, you know?
Right.
So yeah, I mean, you can still be the loser, and it's already happening, you know, as we talk about this. I see articles coming up all over right now. Like right now, this election's too important to vote third party. They're already starting to beat that drum. Like, don't vote third party. This is too important of election. You know, it's like
every 4 years.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, you ready to continue?
Yep.
Who?
The American people. When you have that 5 minutes that you can be home and close the door and have some peace, it's very, very difficult to say, look what they're doing to my vote. It's much easier to say, we have watchdogs in place that will be taking care of this for me. And I think what we don't realize is those watchdogs are not in place.
You're at the center of a very explosive story where people have died, don't know if it was murder, don't know if it was suicide. Dogs have died, don't know if it was murder.
Probably wasn't suicide.
If it wasn't suicide. That's not funny.
Yeah.
I've never had this feeling before that there's no place to turn. Normally you had the media, you'd go to the press would become furious, at least parts of it, enough of it. Or you go to your congressman, but nobody seems to care.
We put this affidavit out in December
of 2004.
You seen it on ABC yet?
I have not seen it on ABC.
If you think that we're going to get any use from the corporate media, I think that you're sadly mistaken. So I'm saying go around it. There is so much that we can do if we begin to act like we, the people, actually have power, exercising it. And guess what? You act like you have power, and the next thing you know, I'll be damned, you've got it.
What do we say to our ancestors who gave their lives for this right to vote? We're sorry. Remember the words of Benjamin Franklin when he left the Constitutional Convention at Independence Hall, and he was asked, what sort of government have you given us? And he said, a republic, if you can keep it. We have not kept it. We have not kept the flame, and we need to take this country back.
Well, I don't know how much one vote counts, but collectively, I guess if we all lose faith, then, you know, might as well go to the Iraq during the Saddam era, you know, have unanimous elections, or have North Korean democracy where it's like basically unanimous and you get killed if you don't vote for whoever they want you to vote for. I mean, if our votes don't count, why bother voting?
I think everybody should vote. If you don't speak your piece, then nothing's going to get done.
Well, it's a democracy and everything needs to be counted correctly, and that's why one of the reasons why we live here.
We're supposedly a country that is based upon democracy, and that's why we go out and try to export it and bomb it into other people.
I want to take a second and comment on this because I actually interviewed somebody who made a film about that. Hold on a second, let me get back to it.
We're supposedly...
So the beach that he's standing on literally had a cross for everyone who had died in the Iraq War. So just a little backdrop. That's what's going on here behind you. Yeah.
Soldiers, not all the civilians, but
soldiers.
Yeah, we don't care about those pesky civilians, just the soldiers.
Well, the anti-war activists that I talked to at the time certainly did, you know, but the main point is that they were trying to bring some kind of a visual to it because people don't think about it. Like the numbers don't mean anything. So anyway.
A country that is based upon democracy, and that's why we go out and try to export it and bomb it into other people, this notion of democracy. But it's important to us because we do claim and assert ourselves to be a democratic country that it actually exemplifies democracy.
I think the proof is kind of in the pudding.
You know, I do want to take another moment, and I should have paused it when he was talking, but that guy that was actually from the Green Party who got up on the podium and was yelling about the founding fathers and we need to take this country back. If you talk like that right now, you get labeled a fascist.
Yeah, you're a extreme right-wing MAGA person.
Nazi person.
Yeah.
Because you keep talking about freedom. Shut up about freedom.
Yes, if you want to make America... If you want to make America great again, you're the wrong person. You're bad.
You're definitely a Nazi. You're a Nazi if you were concerned about freedom. You're a Nazi if you're concerned about censorship. Like if you don't want to be censored, meaning because Nazis love censorship. You know, but it just you can't talk like that. And that was a left-leaning guy, right?
It's not just today though. I don't know if you remember the MIAC report. You're from Michigan. That's where it came out of. This is the Ron Paul days, and if you were driving around with a bumper sticker that said that you supported freedom in some way, that you support the Constitution or Ron Paul, you were labeled as a domestic terrorist, and that when troopers pulled you over, they had to treat you as if you might be a person of a terrorist. The MIAC report was exposed by a friend of mine, and they basically shrugged that off as well. Like, yeah, so we put it out there, we apologize. Sorry. They did apologize to Ron Paul for it because he was named in the report. But basically, if you supported the Second Amendment, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, liberty, or Ron Paul, you were a domestic terrorist.
Right.
And this was 2008-ish.
Well, and that comes back to something that Yuri Bezmenov always said. Like when people asked him, how do we stop this Soviet ideological subversion that had brainwashed our societies? Patriotism literally is the cure to ideological subversion. Like if there's a country that's coming in to try to demoralize your country, patriotism will be the force that will bring everybody together to fix it. So of course we need to demonize patriotism as literally fascism, right? And I'm not to say that patriotism cannot develop into nationalism. It certainly could, but that's not, being a patriot of the United States isn't going to make you a fascist. Not if you are being honest and in good faith at all. So,
right. I'm not a fan of patriotism, mostly because that's where it generally leads to is nationalism, and then we've seen what happens there. I do find it in some way, just as George Carlin was pointing out, silly that you can be proud of something you had no control over where you were born. I mean, you could have easily just been born in North Korea or Russia as well. You have no control over, and yet you're completely proud of it. Again, you can be proud to be free. You can be proud to be an individual, I think, but worshiping a flag, a cloth with some kind of symbol on it seems silly to me.
But you are a fan of North Virginia patriotism, right?
Well, you know, I don't think most people in the audience get that.
That's like a really old school V radio joke to guys. All right, you ready to continue?
Yes, let's get this done.
Yep.
When I see things start to change for the betterment of the people, rather than policies that seem to benefit corporations and the wealthy, when I actually start to see things and government enact policies that actually help everyday people, then I'll believe that voting is working.
In his continuing effort to demand accountability and to publicize his story, Clint Curtis ran for Congress against Tom Feeney in 2006. Feeney refused to debate Curtis and outspent him by a factor of 26 to 1. Theirs was one of 4 congressional races in Florida that were contested in 2006, prompting Florida's new Republican governor and the Republican legislature to mandate that they would vote on paper ballots in the 2008 election, where Curtis will run again against Tom Feeney. Mavis Georgalis spent years in the courts fighting both the Yangs and FDOT. Ultimately, she was reinstated with full back pay and awarded a large settlement from the Florida Department of Transportation. In August 2007, Diebold changed its name to Premier Election Solutions, Inc.
I think what Clint Curtis is really an object lesson in what can go wrong and how easily it can go wrong. In fact, we don't know if his software and his code was ever used in any voting software. But the fact that we're not able to look at the software that is used to count our votes, this secret software that is used to count votes in America, the world's greatest democracy, is frankly a scandal. And we all should be very concerned about that.
Take this information, do something with it, go to Brad Blog, learn what's going on. Most importantly, this democracy is not going to save itself. We need all of you to get out there and take action. I'm Brad Friedman. Thanks for listening.
You're welcome, Brad.
You're welcome, Brad. To peacefully and patriotically let our voices be heard.
Right.
So that was Murder, Spies, and Voting Lies, Election Fraud Story of Clint Curtis. You can find it on my BitChute channel. There's a lot of stuff on my BitChute channel that I cannot upload to YouTube, so please make sure that you get over there. You know, and yeah, I love that comment. Be nice to America, or we'll bring our democracy to your country. You know, and that's relevant also just to my ongoing, like, I mean, I'm almost done with it, but anyway, my feud with Sitch and Adam was that they mock people who ever suggest that our country might have ill intent and say, well, have you considered America bad? Like, trying to joke with people. And I'm like, dude, you don't know what you're talking about. We can get into that another time. But, you know, so I guess processing this, folks, you know, I hope that this kind of opened your eyes, you know, and those of you listening to it later, you know, again, you know, you can always, you know, share this documentary with someone else later, but we're going to be interviewing Clint Curtis, hopefully next week. I still haven't nailed that down, but I talked to his secretary and he's always been willing to come on for me when I've asked in the past. And I think you can actually find versions of it on my old Blog Talk Radio account, but just, you know, be aware of the fact that this guy is a Democrat and he still wanted to expose this issue and that he still felt
you warned him. Be aware, he's a Democrat.
Yeah, you know, that he still wanted to expose this issue and that he, you know, he actually he totally believes that there were problems in the last election.
Don't forget, he's a Democrat.
Yeah, don't forget, he's a libertarian. Freaking libertarians. Who brings libertarians on their shows? Who does that? Freaking libertarians. Yeah.
It was a good show. I'm glad you sent me the video to watch. I'm glad we did a show on it. You know, this is one of those times where I wish our show got tens of thousands or, you know, hundreds of thousands of views to it because, you know, this documentary has been out for a while and it's the first time that I've seen it. Obviously, there's information in it that I knew about or I remembered hearing about back when that was going down, like the guy in Georgia.
Right.
You know, the whole, you know, we don't do the autopsy here in Georgia thing. So I think, you know, as old as this is, and even though that, you know, it is from the 2000 era, the early 2000, the George Bush, John Kerry. I think it's very relevant today. And as it's been pointed out in our chat by us, Dominion is Diebold. It's one and the same. They're the Dominion bought them all out. They have that software. They have those machines. They have all the proprietary and intellectual property of Diebold. And again, we have a candidate going around saying the election was rigged. It just happens to be a candidate that says a lot of things that make people think about that candidate.
Right.
But it's been said not just by him in the past. And, you know, again, this is why I have my reservations about voting. What's the point if the vote doesn't count?
Right. And that's also why my view now is that you vote because you vote according to the policies that you like. Because as like George Carlin pointed out, that he believes that the system will occasionally spit out, you know, essentially what amounts to like placations. And that's still better than nothing. I don't like that that's how it is. But I do think that we do get some changes. I think it's because they recognize that they have to give us things every now and then, you know, so we're voting for what those things are, you know, but at the end of the day, I don't believe for a second that that guy killed himself. You know, there were people commenting in the chat that they were looking at it on a phone. It might have been a little harder. Again, like the hole in the guy's shirt was like 12 inches by 12 inches. You don't do that to yourself when you're trying to kill yourself.
Yeah, with all the blood and everything, showing that one picture, that was very hard to see. It's interesting that he killed himself by slitting his wrist in that hotel room like that. I mean, there's quicker, less painful ways to go than doing that.
Drove 3 hours out of his way.
Yeah, the question
Yeah.
came up in chat if his handwriting was verified. I mean, even if that was the case, obviously somebody sitting there saying you're going to do the. I mean, again, if somebody's holding a gun to your head, telling you you're going to do this, you generally continue to comply, thinking that maybe they won't go through with it as long as you comply with what they're saying. But there's still a lot of sketchy things that are questionable in all that. And as the lady from the DOT pointed out, we may never know. That time has probably passed, that we may never get that information now and never know. And the fact that, again, most people don't care that much to even demand that it be investigated thoroughly and that we do know is going to be part of that without all of us out there screaming for it, saying we want to know, we need to know, this is important, we have to know. Who's gonna bring it to light, you know, if nobody really cares. And in terms of our view count, I think if everybody that's listening just grabs the link to our show, Neil, and pastes it in their social media sites and shares it and tells all their friends and family to watch it, we could get that view count up there to where, you know, thousands of people are seeing this. And then maybe they can get angry enough at the system to start doing something about it. And it will all start right here on the V Radio and Liberty Unleashed radio show. We will have started it.
One would hope. And that's why I'm going to continue to support Clint Curtis also in his campaign for Congress. Because you imagine a guy like that on C-SPAN. He's well-spoken. He's now a lawyer. He's an activist lawyer, too. He helps people in his community. You know, if we could get him on C-SPAN to be able to argue about this issue, they wouldn't be able to ignore him anymore. Well, yeah, he's a Democrat. So the poll was finished with 39 votes. Do you feel George Bush actually won the elections against Gore and Kerry? And it did finally level out to no. 61% of the people do not feel that George Bush won the elections against Gore and Kerry, with yes at 38%.
I think that 38% was messing with us.
I think they're entitled to their opinion, even if it's wrong. You know,
I'm not saying you're wrong, but you're wrong.
Right. I'm not saying you're right, but you're left. You know, like that. So, you know, this has been a great show, guys. I literally just did another stream right before this. So I've been cranking out the stuff because I have plenty of free time to do so. And I've just kind of felt the need to do so. It's kind of like a momentum. You know, I managed to find a lot of topics to cover. But if you guys haven't...
Neil.
Say that again?
I inspire Neil. That's what happened.
Yes, you inspire me. It's... Did you ever know that you're my hero?
Yes, I did.
Everything that I wish I could be. I can fly higher than an eagle, but
I knew that
you, Brian, are the wind beneath my wings.
And this is just getting too sappy for me.
Yeah.
Everybody, get over, subscribe to our channels, and hit the bell so you get notified when we go on the air. We don't have to tell you we're going in the air. You'll just know because the
theoretically, right?
Theoretically,
because the bell doesn't always work either.
All right. And again, as I said, grab our links, paste it on your social media, tell everybody that, say, hey, you have to listen to this. This is crazy stuff going on here, and you need to listen.
And if you support this kind of stuff, because the funny thing, the joke that I almost wanted to say was that, it's actually the fact that we cover stuff like this that is the reason why thousands of people won't see it. If the YouTube algorithm has its way. Again, I talked about this for about 10 seconds on a 6-hour stream and got banned for a week. They've lifted that restriction now, but people need to know that this is an issue. I would have kind of thought it was just like, be without, obvious, it should have just been like obvious that this is always going to be a problem and we're always going to have to take extra care if we're going to use machines. And that's actually my daughter, a kitty lover, is one of my mods saying, smash that like button, everybody. And if
you
you're
raised
listening,
a smart daughter to say something like that.
Right, exactly. If you're listening on my channel, do make sure that you go join Liberty Unleashed channel as well. Brian's going to be doing his own content, and especially for those of you who tolerate my own left-leaning views, but like my show anyway, Brian is more right-leaning. So, you guys will like his content probably a little more than mine, just a little though.
And he's not a Democrat.
Right, and he's not a Democrat. And if you start to like his content more than me, and he shows up in a Georgia hotel slashed up, I promise you, I had nothing to do with it.
Sure.
And
I
I
don't even know where
his,
Georgia is. That's probably
I didn't even shoot his dog. Isn't Georgia in Europe somewhere? Wasn't there like a war there?
Yeah, I do have a dog. She's a very beautiful dog, so don't shoot her.
Well, then don't get more popular than me. This is a very simple thing, right?
All right.
So Tara Thrall says, "Say done." So yeah, and also guys, make sure you go to hy.page/vradio as well to subscribe to me on Rumble and Discord and Twitch and all of my other places because, again, I'm trying to be redundant. I want people to be able to find this as many places as possible. And again, I don't know how long I'll last on YouTube. So the final statement I would also make is that for a while, for the last 2 weeks, I've been saying, don't donate anymore. Don't donate anymore. Unless you really can. And unless it's, and literally the day after I said that it was actually right after the stream was over. I got a call from my boss for the little job that I do on the internet that was just kind of helping me make ends meet. And my income got cut in half. So I'll be okay, but not great. And if there was any kind of emergencies, I would be in trouble again. So if you would like to support me on Patreon, PayPal, Subscribestar, obviously Super Chats work here. Then please do so. You can find all of those at hy.page/vradio. And if you guys would prefer to do Venmo or something like that, just reach out to me and we can make that happen too. So, all right. Was there anything else from you, Brian?
Nope. I don't have anything to beg for money on, so I won't do it this show. I'll maybe wait till the next show. But again, I thank everybody for tuning in and listening. I think it was a very valuable show, and I appreciate everybody's support. Thank you.
You got it. Thanks for tuning in. You guys take care.
Even you Democrats.
Even the Democrats or the Republicans. Even the Libertarians.